Education Board will take order. Seth, you call roll, please.
Governor Kitzhaber.
Here.
Julia Brim Edwards.
Here.
Yvonne Curtis.
Here.
Matthew Donegan. Samuel Henry.
Here.
Nicole June Maher.
Here.
Mark Movahill.
Here.
David Reeves.
Here.
Ron Saxton. Mary Spildy.
Here.
Kay Turan.
Here.
Hannah Vandering. Dick Withnell.
Okay, we have four. First agenda item is approval of the minutes from the April board meeting. Here's your packet there. First one. It's been moved that the minutes from the April board meeting be approved. For a second.
Second.
Second. Is there objection? Nancy.
Hi. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the visits I've been doing and what I've been seeing, because having the opportunity to go out and see how people are implementing the 40-40-20 goal is really something I wish all of you got to experience. So I was at two high schools, Franklin High School, and I saw a tremendous program where a third of the student population is involved in what they call a scholars program. In the scholars program, all of those students take 3 AP courses, one I think through a language course. They're really committed to each other to set goals about going to college. There's a room where everyone's got the college they're going to go to, and this is seniors through freshmen. So seniors are mentoring freshmen, and staff are mentoring seniors. And the principal told me that this year they had 100% of the students in that program who are going to college, and every time someone gets in and gets a scholarship, there's a huge celebration. That's 1/3 of the population, and then they said the other 2/3 of the population, I believe they told me it was about 60% of the students who are going to college. So that was really exciting to see, and just the great leadership there and moving that. And then we went to Phoenix High School, and what we saw there, it's the I Have a Dream program, which is working with some local nonprofits around really supporting our students who are underrepresented in college and really providing them all the supports it takes to get there. So I think every high school I've gone to has a real focus on how do we get more college credits in high school, and how do we hold that dream for every student, knowing some will go to 4 years and some will go to 2 years, and some will get certificates and license and go in the world of work, but they'll all be ready. So the other thing I did want to talk about, a number of us, a sponsorship with COSA and OEIB was around poverty, and we did a poverty simulation, which was really powerful. I recommend it to everyone. And the First Lady spoke, and she was very articulate about, well, just, the right of every child to have food, to have a place to sleep, to have a place to do homework, but also the economic impacts when, and some of the things in the system that could be corrected to really make it so we don't have the level of poverty we do. I know you've all seen this pamphlet, but we have some data here that says in 2012-13, 1 out of 50% of our students were on free and reduced lunch. So this is definitely an issue, I think, as a board. It's very important for us to really think about that and think about how to really support our students and any policies that can really change the curve on this, because 50% of this is huge. So that's my report.
Okay, any questions for Nancy? Good job.
Thank you.
Next agenda item is reaching the 3rd grade efficiency benchmark. And Rob, are you going to lead us through that, please? She's cutting in, Seth.
Yeah.
You've been tapped.
All yours.
And I don't want to dance. Good afternoon, Governor, members of OEIB, Chief Education Officer Nancy Golden. For the record, Rob Saxon, Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction. With me today are Jada Rupley, who is in charge of Early Learning Division, and Karen Twain. Karen Twain is an executive on loan from the Tigard-Tualatin School District and is working on effective implementation of full-day kindergarten and reading initiative. And so very pleased to have both of them with us today, and we hope to be able to talk today for hopefully about 20 minutes, although I have to admit that the three of us get excited when we start talking about this specific topic, and so we'll try to contain ourselves just a little bit, and then also to give you some time to speak with us. And you should have a sheet in front of you with a couple different components to it. One of them is asking really, what is compelling? So we're going to make a presentation today that really is about a combination of two things, but it is one significant effort, and that significant effort is to get students to be readers by the end of third grade. And so we are asking you, are there five compelling things that you could identify as we present, or five things that you find compelling about the presentation as we do this work? And then we'll be asking you to share those things out with us so that we can hear what those are and make sure that we're really thoughtful as we move forward about that. And then the second piece of it is a chart where we're going to be asking you about what kinds of outcomes that you all would like to see as we move toward completing this initiative or doing this work. And so certainly if you could, and I see people sort of looking around, does everybody have that in front of them, the document that I was referring to? Okay, great. And so if you could get the five compelling pieces, that would be wonderful. So getting to 40-40-20. Yes, that exactly. It has that sort of odd-looking colored boxes on the bottom. Getting to 40-40-20. You know, as we talk about this piece of work, the third grade reading initiative, and making sure that we have all students able to read by the end of third grade, we ask ourselves the question: if we're going to get to 40-40-20, you know, how do we actually accomplish that? How would we get there if we are not able to get all students to be readers by the end of third grade? Because we know that if you cannot read by the end of third grade, it's much less likely that you're going to be able to develop that skill over time, and that really the time and intensity that it takes to recover that after third grade is extremely difficult, if not impossible. And the odds that you're going to graduate from high school and go on to be successful either in college or career or in some kind of a mixed educational setting without the skill of reading also is very highly unlikely. And that we have to get this piece right. We have to do this, we have to do it well, and we need to make sure that we're able to accomplish it for all students. Because you just simply cannot get to 40-20 unless you do.
Governor Kitzhaber, Chief Education Officer Golden, and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Karen Twain. I'm the Director of Literacy for Oregon Department of Ed right now. As Rob said, my passion is pretty high for this. I'm excited about this initiative that we put together because I know it works. And one of the reasons I know it works is because I was principal of a high poverty school with about 50% kids of color and about 40% kids who were in ELL. And we were a Title I school. We had when I came in, we had frustrated teachers who said, I'm working as hard as I can, but I can't figure out why we're not moving the dial. And so we got very intentional about what we wanted to do. And each year we kind of added a layer. And as we did that, we received some awards for closing the achievement gap through the state. But we were just very intentional and focused on equity in particular. We kept adding things, as I said, and one of the things we added was full-day kindergarten. And that helped to bring things to the table as well. And then finally, we added a family liaison. And there was a sweet spot we had, a year where we had full-day kindergarten, family liaison. We were working with the community and parents, as well as just really strong instruction. And we really hit our stride. It was literally a golden year. And what happened in that year, and I want to share the story just so to kind of send it home to you, is that I met separately with our Latino parents and families. And we had just gotten a lot of our test results, and we'd had some informal assessments as well. And I stood up before them, and it was kind of a made-for-TV moment where I said to them, it's true what I've been telling you, your kids aren't stupid. And actually, they're not only not stupid, they're extremely bright, and they actually just outperformed the rest of the school. The trend went like this. They did better than anybody. Their growth was significant. And everybody stood up and applauded, and women were crying, and it was one of those moments, truly, where I thought, this does work if we set our mind to it. So as you hear this initiative, I want you to keep that in mind, because I really believe with my heart of hearts that we can make this work.
So we did think that it was important to talk to you just really briefly about what our current results look like. And so these are the results that we have for the last 5 years in the state of Oregon. We'll go all the way back to 2008, 2009. And these are based on the Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skill results on reading and the percentage of students that have met or exceeded on the assessment. And these are all balanced up for any kind of changes in cut scores and so forth. And so really what we've seen see right here is that the high watermark year was the 11-12 year, where 70.1% of our third graders were able to meet or exceed on the Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skills in reading. I will say you can see that there, generally, if I was going to draw a trend line, you'd see a general but too slow upward trend on this over time. And we know that we've implemented significant numbers of districts have implemented RTI. We know that people have become a little bit better about evidence-based reading programs over time, but we also recognize that this trend line is not going to get us where we need to go. Furthermore, if we disaggregate this with multiple different efforts around disaggregation, what you see is that there are achievement gaps that vary somewhere between 20 and 40%, depending on what subpopulation or how you want to disaggregate the data. And again, we cannot get to 40-40-20 with these kinds of results. We need to make sure that as we do this work, we do it in a way that closes these achievement gaps and make sure that all students have equitable outcomes and that all students are able to be effective readers.
So Rob, is there any explanation for the 10% jump between 10-11 and 11-12? Or is that just...
Governor, I do not have an explanation other than those are the results. There was a...
That was like the bottom of the recession.
Yes, but I do not have an explanation for that.
So there's three really main points to this program or this initiative that we're talking about. Full day kindergarten, which I'll talk about in just a moment, is a large piece of the pie, and that goes into effect paid for everybody who chooses to do it in 2015, in fall of 2015. The second piece is really about the focus on literacy, and particularly in the grades K1, 2, 3. When we have some really good research to back this up, again, about what works. And when we're talking about full day kindergarten, we're actually talking about starting before full day kindergarten. So we're going to catch these kids as young as we can get, and you'll hear more from Jada too in terms of maybe even before that. But we're going to get those kids in full day K, give them a high literacy and numeracy focused curriculum and delivery. And then we'll keep doing that first grade, second grade, third grade. And while there is a focus right now in the school system to do that, we're talking about, again, being very intentional, and that totality that will build up from kindergarten and then the next year with K1 and then K1, 2 will, we think, get us to the third grade outcome that we want. And in doing that, it talks about equitable outcome supports, and what we mean again is closing that achievement gap as soon as we can. The problem is a lot of these kids are getting interventions and they're failing before we can get to them, and then they just can never catch up. It's very difficult. It's doable, but it's a lot easier to get these kids young and get it done. So the focus is on kids of color, but again, we believe that if we can focus on those kids, then we're going to move the dial for all kids. And I saw that again in my school, where we really focused on equity and the racial achievement gap, and in doing so, I saw my special ed kids hop up. I saw my lower income kids hop up. We saw ELL kids get better at academics. So there's a lot of instructional strategies that will really help that. So we'll help as a state to put those supports in place for folks. So full day kindergarten. We recently had a full day kindergarten summit a few weeks ago, And again, what we talked about there is this is an opportunity to focus on equity. And if we can identify kids before they come into kindergarten, there's the work that we can do in the summer and before, and we will engage the entire community. In other words, we're going to need help from community-based organizations, early childhood, daycares, Head Start, all the organizations that you all know. We want to start as much as possible with an even playing field before they even get to kindergarten on that first day. And then once they're there, really take the additional time that's needed, know where those kids are from the assessments that we give them, and then plan accordingly. So as you all know, 9 to 11:30, which is a half-day program typically, it's not enough. If you've been in a kindergarten classroom, and I think most of you have, you see them toddle in, that takes a good 20 minutes. They toddle out, that takes an additional 20 minutes. Getting a drink of water is a major deal, as well as wiping down the tables, whatever it is. So the kids are there to learn not only the academics, but all the routines and the behaviors and the sharing and all those kinds of things. So we need that extra time to give to them, and that could come in the form of the summer before, maybe some extra times, could be weekends. You know, that's all to be described. This is a completely different construct than what people are used to, even though some people have been implementing full day K. So we really are driving the point home, this needs to be effective, it's got to be quality. And we need to be mindful that we don't waste this opportunity. So what we're going to do is make sure that it's developmentally and age appropriate, that kids don't walk in and sit down to 90 minutes of direct instruction. That's not the intention. We'll be very playful and joyful. We're going to make sure that developmental practices are layered in. And again, if you've been in kindergarten classrooms, the great kindergarten teachers make it so fantastic that it's hard not to learn. Kids aren't even thinking about it. That means stepping up to the carpet, and they're counting off, and then they do the alphabet chant, and they're singing and dancing. It's fun stuff, but they're learning. And then, again, the focus is on literacy and numeracy. So what we're doing by making that the focus is that the time and effort that you put into that is less time and effort that you have to put into interventions, and less money you have to put into interventions. And in talking with a lot of kindergarten teachers, as well as the research base around it, they say if I have a full day to work with those kids, they won't need many interventions after their full day kindergarten year. It's when you only have them for a half day, they're not getting the core, they only get the interventions, or they get the reverse, that it doesn't work. You've got to give those kids both. So what we want, and what we've seen with full day K, is that they feel really good about themselves, and that they leave being a reader and a great writer. We see kids writing stories and reading books. I mean, it's really the best thing in the world.
So what I want to talk about here just for a little bit is what really highly effective literacy programs look like. And what we find is that when we start looking at evidence of programs that have had significant success with students around being able to be readers, we find that there are common threads within those literacy programs. And so what I'm not doing here is dictating this is the literacy program, but what I am talking about are the components of literacy programs that are required in order to make sure that students are strong readers by the time they reach third grade. And really, as we're talking about this, I'm talking about this kind of literacy program in the full day kindergarten, in first grade, in second grade, and in third grade. And that continuum and the ability to do that program wide and over time, over that time span, is a big component of what gets us there. So I want you to see that what comes on the screen here really starts with the base and then builds on itself. And so one of the most important components here and foundational to this is the involvement of community and making sure that we have a strong equity focus. We know that we can make great gains with students with a strong literacy program, but if we're not intentional from the outset, if we don't say, starting today, we need to make sure that we have an equity focus where we're thinking about how we engage parents, how we engage the community, and make sure that we have evidence-based practices around culturally relevant teaching. How do you teach in a culturally relevant way? How do you make it compelling to me from where I come from as a student that we're not going to be able to be successful? And it is foundational to this piece of work, and especially when we start talking about prior to kindergarten. especially the summer before, making sure that we have the right kinds of groups and community-based organizations working with those students, and that we are intentional about closing the achievement gap. It really takes an incredible amount of professional development, which districts locally can provide, and that also we can provide as an agency at the Oregon Department of Education, or we can support with that, as can some of our partners like Chalkboard, COSA, and others. And that we have really strong leadership that understands these programs and how to implement them and is dedicated to this piece of work. It's important for people to take a look at data and have snapshots as they move along and understand how to use data, analyze it, and recognize the results that they're getting over time. So having a core curriculum program, one that involves, you have to do a lot of professional development around effective instruction, and we all know how important a good teacher is. But making sure too that we have a core curriculum that everyone understands and is able to articulate smoothly, both horizontally, so that if we're all first grade teachers, that we're thinking about how we do our instruction in the same way. It isn't that we have to do it the same, but that we have the same foundational belief set, and that we have the same long-term outcome in mind, and that our methodologies are very similar, because we're going to pass these students off to second grade teachers. And some of Karen's children are going to go into that second grade teacher's classroom, and some of mine are, and some of Jada's were. And so it's also important that this articulates vertically. And so we have to have similarity and understanding about what it is that we're doing and what we're attempting to accomplish in kindergarten, then first grade, then second grade, then third grade, so that we have a really strong program, and that we all agree as educators what the core curriculum is, what it is that we intend to accomplish, and how we're going to go about it. That's a really important component of this, and it makes a huge difference in the kind of outcomes that you achieve with students. That there's a universal screener, and that screener is delivered very early on in the process, so that we know precisely where students sit and exist in their skill around literacy. So that it's quick, we have it, we go through it, and I know this is where this student sits as far as reading is concerned, and if they have an issue about being able to be a successful reader, that I can identify what that issue is and target intervention to successfully help them overcome what that is. And so within that, once you do the screener, then a decision set of rules or decision set of protocols that says, here's what the result looks like for this student, and as a consequence, I've got a set of decision rules, and with those decision rules, if they're behind, I know precisely what the intervention ought to look like in order to get there, and that intervention sits outside of the typical instructional time. So we're going to have typical instructional time around reading, and if you need something more, you get more, both within the school day and outside of the school day. And then lastly, that we do some progress monitoring, because if we do that progress monitoring and I find that a student is making progress with that intervention, I should maintain it until they no longer need it, and then they become a typical reader. Also, if they're not making progress, then I'm able to know that, change the intervention, and give them a different opportunity around what it takes to overcome whatever deficit that they may have. And so we're monitoring that progress and making ongoing decisions, and that's part of the reason that the database teaching is so important.
Governor Kinsauber, Nancy Golden, OEIB members. My name is Jada Rupley. I'm the Early Learning System Director for Oregon, and this is some of the most important work that we're also doing with the Early Learning System, is to join with the K-12 system to make sure that we all are engaged in a third grade benchmark. You've heard in your subcommittees the significance of the kindergarten assessment that we put into place last fall for the first time, and you've heard many of the results and the data, and I'm not going to go into that today. What I really want to do is talk about the fact that this is a first look for schools, to be able to look at the kids coming from the early learning system, but it's also that opportunity for us to do that look back, and you'll hear oftentimes look forward, look back. As we look back to the early learning system, what we're going to look at is the recent redesign that we're actually elbow deep involved in terms of the early learning hubs. And with the early learning hubs, we have put together communities basically looking at engaging in kindergarten readiness in a different way. all working together to be able to do that. That happened through legislation, through the governor's work with the Early Learning Council. And we're in the process that we have the first 6 identified, and 5 o'clock yesterday was the end of round 2. So we'll begin to look at those up to 16 to be able to do. Probably the most important part is we have to start with healthy learners. And many of you who have heard my presentations before, I talk about the bridge, and the bridge starts with healthcare. And in the healthcare, we have strong relationships with each one of these early learning hubs with CCOs and healthcare providers, because that's going to be the key to be able to start that. Basically, not only kindergarten ready, family and child, but also the 3rd grade benchmark that we want to accomplish. So when we look at that, we look at the strong connections with health for the foundations, we look at our CCOs at the hub table, and then we want to talk a little bit about the community-based operations. So when you look at the school system, what you know is you have buildings, you have districts, you have a fairly involved system. If you look at what families deal with in the early learning system, the governor's often talked about this as a scattershot approach. So what we have to do is figure out a way to address families where they are. And that sometimes is not as easy as we'd like to think. So for children who spend their time outside of their home in the care of others, we have done a major implementation through Race to the Top, and it's called Quality Rating and Improvement System. And QRS are the initials that we use to go with that. But what that basically means is that there's a significant amount of effort going on in professional development of those licensed child care providers. They look at positive provider and child interactions. They have curriculum in place. They post their lessons for the day. And they also learn sustainable business practices, because many of these folks are small businesses and we want them to stay in business, because that gives the continuity for kids to be able to move forward. So as we look at the results and the baseline, we're going to be looking at the way to invest to be able to make sure that we're addressing how we get kids ready for kindergarten in those kindergarten programs. And so what we want to know is the key time for us to work together is that summer before kindergarten. How is it that we take those investments to be able to invest in kids to be able to have an equitable start as they come to kindergarten? And that's one of the things that we wanted to make sure today that you knew about in terms of that look back. You come again.
So I'm going to put some building blocks together here like Rob did. The first thing I want to talk about in terms of implementation is just that this is going to need to be culturally relevant instruction. And a lot of people use that term, and I'm not sure that we're always saying the same thing. So I want to be clear about what we mean by it, which is that when a student comes to a teacher's classroom, they don't always know them. They make their best guesses, they do the best that they can. But the truth is, we need wraparound. We need the families involved, and we need our community-based organization and anybody in the community that we can get onto the picture. And by doing this, you have everybody around that kid, and it makes the educational program much, much better than just a teacher working in isolation. But it takes some training to do this. So we're going to have to show teachers as well as train the parents and community. And that goes to the next, which is training and coaching support. So Rob really already said this, but it's key that we're all on the same page, that we're trained and have the same philosophy, but also practices, or similar at least. And so we're asking that it be the responsibility of the district or possibly school, depending on the size of the district, to really have some sort of instructional coach that leads this effort. And then on a statewide basis, we would support those coaches in districts. In terms of evidence-based curriculum, again, as long as it's evidence-based, the district would choose that curriculum. And we just want it to be proven. And again, the kindergarten teachers should be pretty similar. And as it filters up to the first grade, second grade, there should be a really nice continuum that just really flows with the curriculum. When we talk about focusing on equitable outcomes, this is very explicit. And what I mean by that is, even though, again, a lot of people say we want to serve all students, we really mean all students. We mean the students of color, we mean the kids who are in poverty, every single kid. How are we best going to do that? So we want it clearly so that no achievement gap exists. And then as far as community involvement support goes, we need to devote specific resources to community-based organizations who have already really been doing this kind of work, and schools need to get better at partnering with those folks. So if we get the resources into those organizations, we feel like it'll be a much better system. As far as appropriate assessments go, this is really important because I believe we've made the mistake of saying kids can't read because we're giving them assessments in English. And what we're really saying is that they can't read, and the truth is those outcomes aren't real because there's many kids who can read in their home language. And what we really need to do is continue to work on language acquisition with those students. And so we need to know the difference and then base our instruction on that. So we have like the Aprenda. We need more assessments for our ELLs and kids who need them. And then I've already spoken about full day kindergarten. Again, it's a really large slice of the pie, but it's the beginning of their K through 12 educational career. And we've got to get it done right and make sure that it's a quality program. So again, we've been working throughout the state to make sure that that's the case.
So I want to talk just for a second about outcome and accountability because within this there's going to be some resource and some focus, lots of training and as I said, some resource. And so with it, we really need to be able to expect that there are going to be certain kinds of outcomes. If we're going to implement this kind of a program, what's the expected outcome by district, by school, by state, and to identify what that is and make that target and then begin to work on holding people accountable around that outcome. And if we don't see people making the kind of progress that we would expect, and we'll see that in many, many places, then we need to be able to go in and look at what's being implemented and ask some of the questions. Is this evidence-based? Have you structured this appropriately with the amount of time? Have you chosen culturally relevant practices and pedagogy? Are you involved in community in a really rich way? What are the issues here so that we can sort of figure out what that is and then create new expectations about what would be implemented and then measure outcomes after that. And if we get to a place where we're either unable to get that kind of implementation or for some reason there's a disconnect there in outcomes, then we have to have a conversation about whether or not those resources are going to continue to flow to that place. So I think that this is a really important concept, and it's something that we've found across many different models and different kinds of implementation, but especially in reading. And we very specifically found this in Tigard-Tualatin, and you see this repeated all across the state. Looked at a lot of data recently that's come out of the University of Oregon and some of the research that they've done about implementation of various programs, but especially literacy programs. And so what I'm trying to show you here really is some demographic breakout, and this would be over time. So there would be about a 4-year time frame across the horizontal axis. And so these would be 4 different points in time, and I've just connected the dots on this graph. And what you saw on the actual slide is that there's a little bit of an increase, and I can't account for a 10% increase in 1 year.
Actually, I figured it out. That was the year, 2011 was the year Nancy came on as the...
There you go. There you go. I knew it. So, but what we see is, some really fairly slow growth. If you were to draw those lines over those 5 years that I showed you, or any combination of years in the state of Oregon, what you'll see is really slow growth. Growth that doesn't get us to where we want to be, and certainly doesn't get us to 40-40-20 in our time frame. When you see really effective evidence-based programs being implemented, it looks different. You begin to see a trajectory increase for all kids. But I want you to really recognize what I have up here, which is that all kids are increasing, but the gap remains. So when you do this really well, when you implement what I talked about around evidence-based programs, and what Karen talked about, and what Jada talked about, you'll begin to see increases. But the gaps will stay. And in fact, those gaps will stay until we implement evidence-based programs with a focus on equity. And you have to be intentional, you have to call it out, and you have to make it embedded in the program. And we actually found in Tigard-Tualatin, and we see in other districts that are really intentional about this, that you can cause that to happen. But it requires a really different kind of conversation. And it requires engaging the community very early and working in early childhood to make sure that you narrow those gaps as much as possible so that when we do the kindergarten assessment, when kids are in kindergarten, we see that that gap is closed significantly. That we're intentional about what our goals are, and that we teach people to teach in a way that's culturally relevant to kids, that we adopt curricula that's culturally relevant, and that we engage the community in a really different way than we ever have before in order to be intentional, and that there are two things you have to do very specifically. One is you have to alter intensity. And by intensity, it means you have to have the best people working in the places where they're most needed. And you have to make sure that you have dedicated kinds of instructional time, and if students aren't making progress, that you give them additional support around literacy in addition to the time that they have within the current school schedule. And then, lastly, you have to vary time. Not just the time that I already talked about, but time during summer intersession, time after school, time during winter break and spring break, and on the weekend, where we bring in other kinds of providers than what we've been able to do in the state previously, and other kinds of partnerships with resource that goes to that with an expected set of outcomes. And then we begin to see what we're all looking for, which is students being strong readers and there not being achievement gaps, and good growth for all students. So again, these are the results that we have currently. These are the results disaggregated on multiple different types of disaggregation. And what I'd like to do is ask you to be engaged in an activity. We'll be quiet here for just a few minutes, and I'd like to hear about what's compelling. I'd like to hear about what you've put down on what defines success for you, and then be more than happy to answer questions. So, our question here is, what does define success? What if we implement this program and we do it really well? What would you like to see for the outcomes that we would achieve in the state of Oregon around third grade reading? And so I look at this, and the truth is, with implementation in 2015, in the fall of 2015, we will see where students are at the end of that first year in 2016. And if you were a third grader in 2015, what I would hope you're going to experience is a really different kind of literacy intensity and expectation in that first year. And we'll begin to see the dial move on third grade outcomes by the spring of 2016 as we do this on a statewide basis. And so in the upper left-hand corner, what we have is the sort of darker blue, and I would say, what would you like to see there? Right now, we know where we are. I'll go back to that. Well, I think I will. And so this is where we were in 2012-13 at 66.4%. My question is, after 1 year of sort of intensified effort in third grade, what would we expect to see for all kids, and what would we expect to see if we did some kind of disaggregation? What would success look like for you in that first year? The next question, if I move down to second grade in the spring of 2016, those students will be second graders in the spring of 2016, and then they'll also have this program as they move into third grade. It's that purple sort of trajectory, if you will. And then if you're a first grader, there'd be 3 years by 2018, and if you were going to get the full program, you would be a kindergartner in the fall of 2015. You'd have full day kindergarten, you'd have an intensified literacy initiative in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and third grade. And really right there in the spring of 2019, what would be sort of that ultimate if we were successful with this initiative? So I'd like you to think about that, put some numbers down for us, and I'd love to hear both what you find compelling and what kinds of outcomes that you'd like to see from this effort. I'll give you about 5 minutes to think about that, and then or however much time until you all say what we think we got it, and then we'll continue on, please.
Sam?
Governor, Superintendent Saxon, this is really interesting. I'm invited to the challenge of betting on futures, as they do in whether it's hog bellies or other pieces, and yet we know it's a very, very complicated piece here. But I would like to throw in one other piece, and you know this is coming, Rob, because we've worked together for a while. What's happening to rural kids in terms of kids that don't have access to very many pre-kindergarten programs, rarely have access to kindergarten programs, and are generally shunted off in another corner there. And how do we begin to put them in one of these boxes that it's going to be targeted for success?
I'd like to talk a little bit because one of the things we wanted to make sure is rural is covered, as well as you heard some of the equity that we're addressing. So one of our first hubs is called the Frontier Hub in Harney and Grant. And they're working together, and if we look at it right now, their proposal to us is almost 100% of kids ready for kindergarten. They're increasing their supply of childcare that's available in the community. And then the third piece, as they're doing their home visiting, they're actually becoming fairly creative because of the fact that you have large geographic areas to cover in that area. And they actually are doing some technology as well as mailing out curriculum, and then the home visitor goes to see. So we're actually looking at a number of things to be able to address them in those rural areas. And 86% right now are going to be covered with this proposal.
Just to add to that, I mean, our most diverse counties in Oregon are actually rural counties. So when we look at our 0 to 5-year-olds being majority minority, we're talking about Malheur County, we're talking about Jefferson County, I mean, Multnomah is the 7th most diverse county, it might be the 8th most diverse county now. And so I think the racial diversity in our incredibly rural communities is much greater than we think about.
And Dr. Henry, within this program, I think certainly the school component of it, if you want to sort of call it that, the kind of program that we've outlined here has very specific types of expectations that has certain components around what an effective literacy program would look like, and the expectation that there's closing the gap, but also that communities would need to figure out how to do this on a regionalized basis. And we have lots of different groups that we're working on coming together, regional achievement compacts, for example, and so forth, who can come together and talk about this. But the important part around making sure that we do close the achievement gap is we have to involve community. And there has to be an expectation of outreach and creation of support from within.
I think probably to that point too is that they've heard, you've heard from us that they don't feel we have the solutions from Salem, and so that's why these communities have been put together on their own to be able to figure out what to do. And we have not put forth a cookie cutter approach, but what we've said is do what you need to do to address those children that you most know, and we're going to measure those results at kindergarten and the 3rd grade.
Are you ready?
If everyone up there is ready, we're absolutely ready. Dr. Moldenhall.
Good job, you guys. Rob, I've been thinking, we know 3rd grade reading is our #1 return on investment, okay? But really, what is 3rd grade reading? And how do we measure it? I've just been thinking about that. And that's kind of heavy, John, isn't it? But
Yeah, I thought this was a carpet square that you got to sit on in preschool.
it is. I'm going to get to what you wanted your first year in a second. But really, how are we measuring 3rd grade reading? I've been thinking of the other achievement compact indicators. We don't have chronic attendance as a 3rd grade indicator. Maybe we ought to look at 3rd grade proficiency, not just smarter balance. Is the attendance a component? I guess I'm looking at our hubs. We're looking at 3 indicators: safety, health, education. Maybe we want to look comprehensively at those 9 years in a child's life. And our goal, we know, is 3rd grade reading, but what is it? It means that you have a stable home. It means that you have proper health. It means you're in school every day. So maybe a variety of indicators besides us just laser locking on our targets are going to be smarter balance, and we're going to have to wait 3 years to calibrate that. What's it mean? That's just food for thought. Second thing is looking at that first year is what is growth. I think growth from beginning to end of 1 year's child life until we can get some longitudinal data, looking at a growth indicator like we have in the report card. I'm just throwing that out there. You asked for what is compelling. I loved the research-based component of your scaffolding. That was very compelling to me. Also, the idea of jump-starting kindergartners with that summer. We've seen that in various places, you know, Islands of Excellence do that. It really does impact kids, especially for the self-control and monitoring type things. That to me was very, very compelling along those lines.
Thank you.
If I may, one of the things that many school districts are doing are an RTI model or RTI top model. And within that, you look at many things in terms of measurement. You're looking at behavior and social emotional, you're looking at attendance, you're looking at the academic piece of it. And so again, as a principal and my staff, we do that together on each kid. And it was very directed. It was almost like having an individual plan for every child in that school. And I think many school districts implement that sort of thing. So it's built within the plan, just not explicitly.
So you think about it, let's say a kid gets a 211. We know there's a standard deviation for that. And we have to score it and quantify it and say he benchmarked or he didn't. But really, if you're in that range with a standard deviation, you're about there. Then we can look at other indicators in that child's life to really see, are we at third grade proficiency?
So I'm just going to kind of bounce all over on a couple of comments I had. So one was I was thinking very specifically at that square for third grade and trying to remember when I was teaching that level and what I saw. And I guess just for a very first outcome, I would say that the instruction for those third graders, if we were to differentiate, should be very different that first year. If what we were trying to do was say, could we find a way to ensure 2 years worth of growth for everybody in third grade, for example. It's going to look different than the strategy, obviously, you plan for the others. And I just know, you know, thank God kids grow anyway in spite of what we do. But being at that grade level, I remember there were times when I just prayed because I didn't know what else to do. And some kids, lo and behold, just grew and they jumped. And that is the grade level oftentimes that happens between third and fourth grade, and especially for boys. So I think that we should take a look at that and study that as we do that, is to really drill down into the data. And I say boys because when you look at our low-performing groups of kids around poverty and ELL, then you look at boys and girls, you know, there's another factor there, and that is just one I remember being a teacher. So that's just kind of an anecdotal thing. And the other one is I'm going to continue to be the champion of dual language and how important that is. And I want to mention around RTI, and I get really excited about this stuff because I think this is all the right stuff we need to do, and I don't want us to miss any of the pieces. So around RTI, what we've been saying over and over again, and in Eugene, when I was there, we did a project where we were part of an OCR complaint, so we had to deal with the RTI along with the linguistic part of our dual language program and the culturally and linguistically diverse decision rules for RTI around that. And I've been saying that for about 4 years, and I don't think we still yet have those as a stake. We are in the RTI project with dual language schools, and we're trying to get there, but it still doesn't seem like we have enough effort to really try to figure out what those are. Because when we look at the culturally responsive practices, I think we even need to be even more specific when we're talking about language, and especially in dual language, and especially with ELLs, even if they're not in dual language. So things like the strategies around the constructing meaning practices, I think we should call those out. They're making a difference all over the place, and districts are adding them like crazy. And from content to also the linguistic. And the other part, I just about lost around that, was the measures. So we, you know, I keep hearing people throw out Apprenda, but as far as I know, Apprenda is a summative measure, and it will be in place with Smarter Balance. But we still don't have aligned Spanish-English measures. So if we're going to honor students' native language and say that, you know, maybe they're at grade level in kindergarten and first grade, but how do we know? And how does that align with the Spanish? And as we move to Smarter Balance and Common Core, we know that it's got to be more than 1 year's worth of growth, so it's 2 years. What does that look like on those particular measures? So you're going to see our best practice panel have a recommendation to either invest at ODE in developing the rest of those easy CBM measures, because it wouldn't be that much investment to invest the other grade levels. That would give us an opportunity to study those, and it's the same measure that's in kindergarten readiness assessment. So I'm just going to say that most of my energy is going to continue to be helping us push and support and maybe provide a model for how we do that with dual language programs.
Yeah.
Great input, thank you. And just to, I think it's really important to say that right now in Oregon, we identify kids as non-readers, especially at 3rd and 5th grade, when we use the Oregon Assessment of Knowledge and Skills, who are competent readers. They know how to decode. And that's what reading is looking at a set of codes really and being able to turn that into a word that has meaning for you. And so we have kids who can read Spanish, we have kids who can read Russian especially, and they're effective readers. And as soon as they learn to speak English, or as soon as they do that English acquisition piece, they can decode in English, and they're perfectly competent readers. We need to know if they are or if they are not, and we need to count them as competent readers, and we need to continue to work on language acquisition, and a dual language is a very effective model for doing that. So.
And one other piece in that is just that making sure that our PD has those transition and bridging skills. Because you could have effective Spanish, effective English, or any other language, but if the teachers who are doing English don't know how to bridge those skills, then you've lost the value.
So thank you. This is probably one of the most exciting presentations I've seen, and overall I think it's really, really good. I have a couple of suggestions on how you might flesh it out a little bit, and I have a couple red flags I might point you to. First and foremost, I think there's an opportunity to strengthen the parent engagement component. Even though for most of us we think of our first years in kindergarten and first grade as a really happy time, for many communities there's a lot of fear and distrust associated with that, and a lot of families deeply distrust schools in general. And I think for us to be really successful, there has to be a deeper emphasis on changing the culture around safety and trust in schools. And so while the focus is reading, we're not going to get there unless we have that fundamental culture change. And that really needs to be done in a culturally specific way and not in a one-size-fits-all manner, which I know will really push the boundaries of sort of the way that historical educational institutions function, but it is really, really critical. The other piece is I think you're going to have to be really careful about continuing to reference evidence-based practice. When it comes to third grade reading, most of the research has actually not been done on culturally specific populations and targeted populations. And some of the methodology that is heralded as an evidence-based practice sometimes has been shown to do real harm to the very populations that we intentionally want to improve outcomes with the most. So I think one solution around how to really say that we want to use proven practices is rather than using sort of this very blanket language around community and equity focus, which I really don't think anyone knows what we mean when we say that, except for we want to demonstrate we care about that, is to really use language much more oriented to culturally specific strategies, because many of those strategies have taken evidence-based practices and then tailored them to really get the good positive outcomes and then really included our cultural norms.
Thank you.
That's great, and your first point about family engagement, that would be part of that summer previous. So it wouldn't just be kids coming and sitting down and learning how to read. We'd be engaging families and helping with support services, making them feel comfortable to come into schools, make it a whole package.
And further, even earlier,
Yeah.
family engagement and parent engagement is part of the work that the early learning will do, and we need to practice on that to make sure it's a warm handoff to schools.
This is a little bit in the weeds, but I think as you RFP these services out or think about how you want to configure them, really thinking about how to have kind of a shared invitation to families and communities that's not just from districts, it's really an invitation from both community-based nonprofit and districts.
Thank
No.
you for the presentation and the work on this. I think it, as we've talked about, it's one of the key components of us being successful. I had a question. There were two different terms that were used, and I'm trying to figure out what the difference is. You talked about in the components of highly effective, you talked about core curriculum and effective instruction. And what I was hearing, and I want to make sure I understand, are you talking about a statewide curriculum that would be used?
No.
Are you talking about you finding the curriculum? Because then I heard evidence-based curriculum, and I understand what Nicole just shared. But I just want to make sure that, again, as we go out and make sure that we're differentiating for the students that we're working with, that we have that ability.
Yes, thank you, Board Member Vandering. So It really is important, and I meant to say that if I didn't, that we're not talking about dictating any specific curriculum, but what I am talking about are really two different pieces, and I think that Board Member Mayer said it really well about making sure that we're using evidence. I said evidence-based, and that really those that are culturally specific effective strategies, and so that's really important. But the other component of that is that it's important that we have agreement where kids learn about what we're going to do, both vertically and horizontally. And so if we're all first grade teachers, or if we're all kindergarten teachers, that I know what's occurring in the other two classrooms, and that I also know what has occurred in kindergarten before that, and what's going to happen in second grade. And so that there's an agreement on the part of a learning entity, if you will, or a teaching entity, that says, here's how we're going to do this piece of work, and what I'm not going to do is do something that's really independent, completely independent of all other people just in my classroom, and then hand those kids off to a second grade teacher who's had other people who've gone about it in an independent way. And that we need to coordinate that, and in fact that when we do coordinate those efforts, we see really different outcomes take place for kids.
One more question, and you don't have to answer it here, but it's one I'm just kind of wondering what the approach might be once you get the strategy laid out, and that is around the recommendation for instructional coaches. So I know that some school districts were able to help have their community support the need for instructional coaches when all these cuts were made. Other communities like mine weren't as successful. So we've got the classroom teachers, we've got furlough days we've tried to add back, we have now negotiations around COLA and all those constraints that we have. Just wondering how we think about ensuring that we're going to have equity across the state in that instructional coaching piece. And that goes not only for the districts trying to figure that out, but then I know there's a lot of neighboring districts by me that I could imagine how they're trying to figure that out given the very small schools and districts they have.
You're asking the really hard questions, right? So I guess that our thinking on that is that as we're going to do something where we expect specific kinds of outcomes, if we're really going to achieve those outcomes, you have to put some constraints around how resources are going to be used.
I agree.
And so you have to design up a program that you know is going to get to the that when implemented appropriately would get to the outcome that's expected. It's part of the reason I asked the group, what would success look like? What kind of outcome would have you say, we're really glad that we did this, and this has us on our way to 40-40-20? Because it's an important question, and if you're going to get there, you have to set some parameters about how resource can be used.
And I just thought of one other thing, and that is when we were talking about professional development, the other one I would ask for is support on the professional development for our building administrators. And you mentioned something about it, but the part that I think is really challenging is the political will part and how that accountability part really, really works. And so how you might coach districts to work with administrators and administrators to work within the buildings. Because that's really hard for some people to understand how to do both.
It's built into the plan, and we just didn't get into the details, but
Great,
it's
perfect.
right there.
Yeah.
So I heard what you just said about we have to set the parameters on what we can and can't do. And I want to go back to what I thought we started with was we now have outcomes. We have the Common Core standards, which we're held accountable for. And there's nobody working in our schools who doesn't believe we should have high standards and be working towards those. But once again, we've got the tight, but then we lose sight of the loose because now we say, and here's how you're going to get there. And we've been doing it, and it has not worked for us. We haven't allowed people to actually provide the education that they believe is appropriate. And now I think we have to be really careful not to get ourselves pigeonholed into, and this is how you're going to do it. Because if we do that, once again, I'll go back to the forum that was over in Eastern Oregon where they said, don't tell us what to do until you know who we are. I don't believe we know who is in each one of those communities. And I think Oregon is very strong in being able to build what they believe is right. And I think we have to stand up and let them do it. And if they're not successful, when we actually let go of the reins a little bit and let them build, like we have in some of the schools where we provided some grant money, like we heard at the last meeting, what's going on in Pendleton. Great things are happening because they were allowed to dream big and they were given some resources to put things in place. So I hope that I believe in the vision of helping every student. I believe we should be working on that, but I think we have to be real careful as a board and as the ones who have talked about this big vision, to use the loose enough to let people dream big and build.
Board Member Vendering, as we were putting this together, that was definitely in our thoughts. And that's why there's much more local control in this in terms of choosing curriculum and what they do during the day and how they align it with others. And that very example was used thinking about it. So it's not us telling them what to do. It's saying, here's the model, and you choose, based on what we know to be best practice in terms of, focusing on equity and having culture relevant, strategies and those kinds of things. So I think we're closer together.
Can I ask a question, because I want to make sure if you're talking about the same thing, or I want to see if I think I understand the two sides of the conversation. So one of the things I heard was you have to have some degree of horizontal and vertical integration. So you have the teachers, all the kindergarten teachers in a school need to know what they're trying to do, not telling them what to do, but they have to communicate that, and there has to be some communication between the kindergarten and first and second, third grade teachers. So that's not what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, and they need to be articulated. I think that's one of the issues that we've had, is they haven't had time to have those conversations about how you build and what we need to do, and especially as we're going into the Common Core standards, they're new and they're tough, and we need to make sure that time is provided, because they will be able to do it if they're able to scaffold the learning. If they don't have those conversations, I think we're going to get stuck in some of the
So,
So what defines success? I would say that you're making sustainable progress, and in 2016, you identify the challenges to getting after both closing of the achievement gap and getting all kids to third grade reading levels. So there's an analysis of, why we haven't made progress with some students, and identifying strategies to get after that. One thing, just an observation, something that I found interesting was the comment about the summer programs, and then just how do you sustain during all the breaks. And I think one thing I know from the Nike School Innovation Fund, one of the things we did in Portland and Hillsborough is we provided grant funding for kids who needed additional help in that sort of kindergarten to third grade during the summer, to have extra instructional time, so they had anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks of extra instruction. And we talked about what the goals were. Often the goal was summarized as stopping the summer slide, which doesn't seem like a very high standard. In fact, it's just standing still. And I'm curious, as you think about this, how do we adapt for that? So if we, during the school year, kids are working really hard, teachers are implementing this program, and then all of a sudden we, get another dip during the summer, and you're actually having to climb back up to that, and then further accelerate. So I would be interested in how you think over time you get rid of the win over the summer being this, stopping the summer slide versus continuing acceleration, and the kids aren't losing all that valuable work that's happening in the school year.
that's a really hard question. And I think it would be really important as we think about how we're going to engage, who's going to participate, that we set out a desire about moving the instruction forward, moving the learning forward, as opposed to just stopping the slide. And that however that engagement takes place, the provider basically, that there is some coordination between sort of some of the teaching methodology, some of the expectations that we've talked about, so that it's done in a more coordinated way than perhaps we've done in the past.
I just thought of one more question. I was wondering if you thought about maybe even incentivizing some districts maybe or schools to pilot more of a year-round school, thinking about that lost, or you're just stretching out the year and providing those interim times. I know I've taught in a system like that, and we had amazing outcomes, and sometimes a little incentive helps with the political barriers in a community where they might be very willing with a little bit of incentive to at least try it.
We have not really talked about that, no, and I'm never sure when people talk about year-round school exactly what it is they're talking about.
So I'm
My-
talking about
My
stretching.
mental model is different than that. So if you're talking about having some students who attend for more days of the year, I think you can really get at what you're talking about. If it is that, you know, the year is paced different, but the totality of instructional time is about the same, I don't think that we'll get at it as closely.
So I'm talking about both, stretching out the year for everyone, so those who need more get interim interventions throughout without having to be pulled out of other courses or other experiences to get their interventions. So that's one of the challenges right now, is to do triple dosing of interventions when you need to. Kids miss PE or music or science or social studies. And instead of having to do that, if you look at the year differently, you find more creative ways to give those kids a boost and not have to pull them out of the curriculum everybody else is getting. So I was wondering if that's even been in the thoughts.
We can certainly have some additional conversation about that.
And there are programs, and I know of one in Portland where they're really training parents to really work with their children in the summer. I mean, I think some of these parents naturally try to enrich, but with a little bit of support around what could you do every day to just help your student maintain their literacy skills. I think parents or communities of parents or people sharing daycare can really do it. I also think, you know, with response to intervention, of course, I'm very supportive of that, but what Yvonne says is really true, that what you don't want to do is have the kids pulled out of, kids who are behind, pulled out of things like science and social studies, where there's more interaction, where kids get to really bond with peers because it's more hands-on. And there are examples all over of districts who use time differently. So I was just in McMinnville, and in McMinnville, they bring some students an hour early before kindergarten, and they extend it, and then during the lunch hour, you know, they use staff differently. The second group comes an hour early, so you're not taking them out of the day, but you're extending the day. So the one thing, and I think you met this by community organizations, but the one thing I didn't, and it's probably in your plan, hear as much about is after-school programs, because there's some sensational after-school programs, really work very culturally specific, sharing, you know, cultural practices and all of that as part of it, but also really do work on the literacy skills. So are you thinking of that in addition to summer?
Absolutely. And we saw a program the other day that was put on by ARC where they're reading to kids. That doesn't even necessarily have to happen during that day. That could happen after school. There's a lot of ways to shift time to try to make it all work.
Yeah. I think it's key.
The only thing, just, I guess I would want to comment on, I think having programs that help parents better support their children is great. I really emphasize it should be an and conversation, because most parents, even if there's two parents and they have college educations, are not reading specialists. And so I don't think we should be relying, so it's got to be an and strategy, I think, parents and teachers, but also I think it potentially could exacerbate the opportunity gap with, if that becomes the sort of intervention or the support that some kids aren't going to have parents or family members to be able to provide that. So I just really want to emphasize both pieces, because kids who are going to be in that gap or who aren't at grade level are going to need really expert instruction and support in the summer.
Yeah, just two things. I think, well, I agree with Julie, what she had said earlier about the outcomes. I think for this board, all students meeting or exceeding third grade reading expectations, I think is very good. I'm sure those are not the exclusive outcomes at all, but I think for the purposes of this board, that would be great to see by 2016. I think it would really have us on track in, a lot of benchmarks in 40-40-20. My other question is, what is the timeline for this? What do you see? Are you going to come back to us in September and say it's in X number of school districts it's being implemented or being started, or what do you see as this, the next update on this, and how many school districts, how many students throughout the state are in such a K through third grade effective literacy program?
Thank you very much, Director Reeves. So our thinking on this really is that this would be an initiative that we would ask for support from OEIB, and then we would also move forward with a request in the 2015 session for implementation in the fall of 2015, and our first sort of measurable outcomes in the spring of 2016.
But this isn't a scale, isn't like model programs, this would be a statewide strategy, scaling
yes.
it up for every
Every school.
birth to third grade student in every school.
Right.
So as we're doing that, are we talking about the learning conditions of the students and what that'll look like for this to be effective? We're talking about giving extra time and all of that. Are we talking about a class size, or looking at having 34 in first grade and expecting this to take place?
When I talked about, there were two things that I said that needed to happen. One was around intensity and one was around time. And part of the intensity question really, I think, is about how many students is an adult expected to serve. So that would be a component for sure.
More questions? Great, good job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see, we are a little bit behind, but we'll get caught up quickly. I'm going to do the quarterly scorecard.
Good afternoon, Governor, members of the OEIB. For the record, my name is Whitney Grubbs, Chief of Staff for the OEIB. Seth is passing out to each of you the OEIB quarterly scorecard. My plan for today is to spend a little bit of time reorienting you to the scorecard. It's been 3 months since you've seen it. So we'll spend a little time orienting you to the card, a little time pointing out a couple of pieces of data on the scorecard that I want you to be aware of, and then a little bit more time kind of forecasting for you ahead to our August OEIB retreat, where I think one of the primary objectives that Dr. Golden will have for you is to spend some time thinking about the strategic plan and the scorecard, and really diving into examining the effectiveness of our strategies, as well as the appropriate metrics and how we set targets moving ahead to the 15-17 biennium. So first of all, there is an insert in your scorecard that simply reflects similar data to what Rob Saxton just showed you around third grade reading. In addition, it shows some data around high school completion rates. This is an addition to the scorecard. It's really just an opportunity for us to more deeply reflect on the achievement gaps at these critical benchmarks, and with the hope that as we move forward in thinking about our OEIB report card, that we can think deeply about how to best set targets around the disaggregated data, and how best to ensure that the strategies that we're putting in place are really effectively closing the gaps that you just heard Rob Saxton talk about. So that piece is really just there for you to reflect on. I'm going to turn now to the scorecard itself. If you remember, the design of the scorecard is such that there are data goals that are in blue in capital letters. Because most of our data is only available on an annual basis, the goals don't really change, so nothing in this report card is new. The next report card you see will have new data because the school year will be complete and we'll have some more information on how we did on third grade reading and how our focus and priority schools are doing and what our English language learners progress looked like. But what does change on this quarterly scorecard is our progress on the strategies. So you will see reflected under each goal one or more strategies with some narrative that gives you an update on the progress that we've made, as well as a status update that'll say on track, target attainable, or attention needed. Next to those status updates are little arrows, and those arrows will show you whether or not from the previous quarter we are trending up in our strategy attainment or on level, or if we've slowed down or decreased in the implementation of that strategy, it would show a down arrow. So a couple things that I want to point out, and then I'll pause and just take questions. I think in many cases our strategies are on track, and they've continued to be on track from the last quarter. There's a couple places where we've made progress, and really I'll point out on page 3, under our STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and CTE investments. I think some exciting progress happened around the implementation of our statewide STEM hubs. We now have a network of hubs that will be helping to really galvanize communities around those important programs that are going to get our kids ready for the college and career path that we want them on. So that's a strategy that we feel like we've made progress on. Implementing the state English language learner plan, which the best practices subcommittee has been moving forward with us. Some of the investments from the last biennium have been, actually all of the investments have been implemented, and so we're moving along on that strategy. Some of the places where we feel like we could use some more focus and sustained energy, both as a staff and from the board, implementation of our equity lens. We have had a few staff turnovers that have put the equity subcommittee in a couple different staff members' hands, and we really feel like now is the time to ensure that we're moving to the next step of implementing the equity lens and really providing both the equity subcommittee, but also all of our state agency leaders and staff with the support they need to not just adopt the equity lens, but to really put the lens into practice in every decision that we're making. And so that's a place where we feel the strategy is very attainable, but that we want to draw some more intentional focus. Let's see, then I'm going to switch to the last page, page 4. Another place just to draw a little attention. You heard last meeting a lot about the Network for Quality Teaching and Learning. And this is another place where we've done a really good job of getting the strategic investment funding that was passed by the last legislature out the door and into the hands of educators. But now we feel like it's time to really deepen the thinking about what it means to create the kind of networked improvement community that we really need to see the kind of changes that Karen Twain and Rob Saxton were talking about, as Director Vandering mentioned. Part of the real important element of doing any of this change is providing teachers with the time and support and professional development they need to do this hard work. And so we are now turning to really think more deeply about how the Network for Quality Teaching and Learning can become a platform for that. Any questions on that? So then real quickly, if you all can just in the next month or so be thinking about how we are intentional about looking at this report card in August, and not only examining where we're at, but really thinking about, are the strategies that we've adopted the right strategies? What can we do to ensure that the data, the actual targets are moving, that we're attaining them? And it'll be, I think, a very good time to reflect on any place where we need to make course corrections, to really dig in more deeply, narrow the focus, change the focus. And so this should provide you a good starting point for that discussion.
Whitney, this is great. Can we share this with folks? Will there be copies or some other way to, I mean, why hide the good news?
Absolutely. It's absolutely there for you to share, and we can provide you with copies. I know I was happy to see Director Withnell walk in the door because he is very good at sharing the scorecard downtown, as he says, and I think it's important for us to keep that at the forefront.
Will be online so people can get it.
We can put it online.
I think
Yeah.
that's important.
Mhm.
So, question, on places where it says data unavailable, is that, are we gonna have it available, or is that just indicating that we had, we went from no data to a data point?
So any place where it says no data is available, we are actively working on have a plan in place to get the data. Some of the places are things like the 9th grade on track measure, which the OEIB adopted in the achievement compacts, but we adopted it ahead of the Department of Education's really plan to collect that data in a way that it can be validated from school districts. So they have now instituted a formal data collection, and we'll have our first official report of that data next fall. There are some places where the data is more in the form of a survey or outreach, and we're in the process of designing those pieces as well. So there will come a point probably in early next fall where we will have no places on the card where the data is not available.
Yeah, it might be worthwhile just having a sort of short note of why the data is not available, like, or, it doesn't come out until September, or, we didn't start collecting it. Yeah, so that way you're not left with a,
What's the story?
yeah, what's the story? The other question I had is, we go from on track with credits 9th grade to the graduation rate. We didn't have, we need to have some sort of benchmark on like the AP dual credit or IB.
We have in the OEIB strategic plan, we have a measure adopted around college credits earned in high school. And it's another place where we're still working on smoothing out the data collection, and so we took it off the report card for now. However, you're going to hear really soon from Dr. Roselli and Peyton Chapman talking about the work that we're doing to really, I think, come up with a strong proposal in the area of ensuring that students are getting those accelerated learning opportunities. And so, when we meet as a board for the retreat in August, I think it'll be really important to keep that on as one of the primary focuses, but that's why it's not on there right now.
So I have a comment and then a question. When I look at this is going back to us giving you feedback on what else we could look at in terms of strategies linked to outcomes. But I'm looking at the 8th grade math proficiency, and our strategy under there is STEM hubs. So we're participating in that, and I know our problems are around math, and I think we're missing some things in terms of strategy. So I would just suggest that some work with ODE and districts or superintendents to identify what do we think is going on there, and I think we can name some obvious ones. Most of us haven't had curriculum. We talked about that with the powering up suggestions. There really hasn't been any curriculum to point us to that's Common Core, so I think that's a piece. The other part is the professional development, and then also the coaching. The same kinds of things we're looking at for literacy, and I know we want to do literacy focus first, but it just seems like there's a long distance between STEM and getting to math proficiencies. I don't think they're linked too closely yet, because what we're doing around STEM is still kind of exploratory, it feels like, and if we're really waiting for that strategy to bump up 8th grade math proficiency, I think we're going to probably wait a while. My question is, would you explain again what target attainable means? Does that mean how's that different from on track?
So if you look at the key, which is on page 4, it's kind of it's a similar to a red, yellow, green, but we changed it actually to be green, yellow, and purple. So target attainable really is kind of a yellow. It means target attainable with continued effort, but that really there needs to be some more focused effort. We need to amp up the amount of attention that we're putting on that particular target in order to reach it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Can I make one more comment about
Of course.
process? And this is thinking about the best practices panel and maybe going into next year now that we have this really great scorecard. I'm wondering, I'm looking for Hilda. I'm wondering if one of the things we think about in terms of our community is how we align some of the reports we're getting around best practices with some of these outcomes. I know we're thinking about our recommendations right now, kind of coming back around to the Achievement Compact, but perhaps in the next year, we could work tightly to say, I'll just use that 8th grade math one, for example. If we were to say that looks like a place that's needing attention, the best practices panel could ask to see what are we doing about that and help work on some recommendations around that, if that were helpful. But I think we need to check with the agencies who have responsibility to see what would be most helpful. Just a suggestion for process.
Thank you. Peyton, Hilda, come up and welcome you to our meeting today, and just want to announce, if you don't already know, that the Lincoln Constitution team has won the national championship for what, 5th time?
It is, we are, thank you, Governor, the only team in the country to have won it 5 times in the 27-year history, and you have a board member, Julie Brim Edwards, whose son is now a Constitution team champion, a national champion. And
For the whole team, not just for Julius.
I should know, we have school board member Buell in the audience, so board member from Portland as well. And aside from Lincoln, it was great representation just from Oregon generally. So Portland had Grant, Franklin, Madison, Wilson having teams competing, and there were teams all over the state. So lots of really great kids that showed up in a really great way in Washington, D.C.
Governor, Kay and I should get some credit because we were on a phone call with
Exactly.
at the airport, as I recall.
Great. Well, we want to, first of all, thank you for this opportunity. For the record, my name is Hilda Rosselli. I'm Director for College and Career Readiness with Oregon Education Investment Board. And I am joined today by a member of the Accelerated Learning Committee, which you may recall has been busy this year, chaired by Dr. Nancy Golden. And you already heard some great things about our presenter, Peyton. But I did want you to also know that she has been at what is now the largest high school in Portland as principal since 2006. She's seen dramatic changes happen in her school in terms of closing the achievement gap for African American students, and really seen a tremendous increase in the percentage of Latino students that graduate, and changing the culture of the school around bullying, around parent-to-parent courageous conversations, and fundraising that's supporting a lot of efforts at her school. So we've been delighted to have an opportunity to work with Peyton, and she's going to walk through a number of the opening slides. We know that you all received a copy of the full draft concept paper, but we've given you a task. And so we're going to ask you to take one moment to quickly look at the sheet. It's a single sheet, should be in your packet, and to look down this list of lingering issues. It's called an update from the Accelerated Learning Committee reflection sheet. Is it in their packets?
Yes.
Oh, good. Phew.
Tab 4, first page.
Thank you. Tab 4. And so when we get to these lingering issues, we want you to be thinking about which of these really, really resonate for you, and to be able to reflect on that as we talk through the potential recommendations to see whether or not you think that these are beginning to be addressed, that these lingering issues will be addressed. And then we're going to close our presentation with an opportunity for you to weigh in on either question 2 or question 3. So I'll give you just a moment to scan that, and then we'll begin.
Priscilla, do we have a number that goes to very, very, very important?
You can put all kinds of
Okay.
stars next to it, whatever you like.
Oh.
Put 3++. Give you a few more seconds. You're good. All right.
Just know when you're in the presence of a good classroom teacher as complimenting Hilda on her effective warm-up strategy to get you all engaged, and you did a great job. It's been a really exciting process serving on the Accelerated Learning Committee, and we've met 5 times since October of 2013. We've reviewed research, reports, and exemplary models. We've consulted with policy analysts from Education Commission of the States and leaders from other states, including Washington, Colorado, and Ohio. We've heard and studied work from practitioners and researchers in Oregon and reviewed earlier legislation and existing data from several state agencies. We've taken testimony and recommendations from individuals who shared potential barriers and recommended solutions. And we currently have just finished reviewing the first draft, and I emphasize it's a first draft, of our concept paper, which is intended to address lingering issues and barriers that need to be addressed if we're serious about our goal. So if I can help you refer to the ALC guiding parameters slide, which should be up here shortly. We just firmly believe that every high school student in Oregon who's ready for college level work should be able to earn at least 9 college credits while in high school without incurring debt. So that's a key belief. We're really focused on a student-centric policy that blurs the historical demarcation separating high school from college. And we want to meet the students' needs that also are reflected in the K-12 Oregon Achievement Compact metrics. Credits earned by students should be transferable to any in-state public college or university. And the high school instructor approval process should be standardized so that the same approval outcome for instructors' application results in the same decision regardless of the approving institution. And we heard from many people that this has not been the case in Oregon in the past. We really want to come up with a statewide agreement on acceptable instructor qualifications that should include demonstrated proficiency rather than degree qualifications only. And although we're primarily focused on 11th and 12th graders, there should be consideration given to younger students who are ready for the rigor of college level coursework. And there are some lingering issues that we still need to work on. So you have those in front of you. I'm going to assume that you can look through those. And we have prioritized what's needed to move the dial. Again, you have these slides, but legislative action, rules or policy changes, focused actions by a state agency, or one-time strategic investment funds. And then we really want to dig deeper into the recommendations determining what may need addressing through policy action steps and investments. And we're really committed and want to emphasize and re-emphasize and thank Nicole for her earlier comment on the equity lens. But we need to provide every student with an educational system that leads students to be prepared for their individual futures. And community colleges and universities have a critical role in serving diverse populations, rural communities, English language learners, and students with disabilities. And students have previously been described or even labeled at risk, underperforming, underrepresented, or minority, represent Oregon's best opportunity to improve overall educational outcomes. So we agree that we really need to use, not just refer to the equity lens, but have authenticity in our core beliefs as well.
So I'm going to walk you through some of the recommendations, and the group has clustered around several different categories. And although in putting this paper together, we realized that some of the specifics may not require legislative action, we also recognize that if legislation happens without attention and acknowledgement of the contextual pieces that need to be in place, you may have a failed false start, or a false start at least. So let's first of all talk about program participation. And as we dug deeper into this topic, it became so clear to us that there's several things that have to occur for students before we just say, now you have access to up to 9 college credits. First of all, a student really needs to understand where am I in terms of being college and career ready. And we know that there are different ways that teachers and students can engage in that conversation as well as involve families, but that's a first step. We also know that there are supports that students are going to need to access to first of all even understand why would I want college and what does it mean to be college ready, and what if I'm not college ready, what kind of supports will the school provide for me. We also believe that students in the high school level need to personally experience the rigor of college coursework. I was listening to something on NPR today, and they were saying, the student was saying, well, yeah, everybody's telling us we have to go to college. But until the student actually takes a course that is at the level of college rigor, they don't yet really personalize that unless it's so ingrained in their vision of themselves that they don't even think about the option of not going to college. So this is very much based on the idea that every student needs to have that experience, and we'll share with you later one of the recommendations of how that might occur. We also, as Nicole mentioned, I just channeled Nicole for a second. As Peyton mentioned, the goal of this committee was to make sure that we had up to 9 credit hours, 3 courses. That's kind of like financial aid eligibility. It's also aligned with the OEIB achievement compacts, because that's a good stepping stone. 1 course alone, I've done that, but I'm not on a journey. I'm not making progress yet. In terms of some of the things that we found in our investigation of what's already occurring, we just wanted to reiterate that these are good practices that must continue. The agreements between high schools and post-secondary institutions, not only are those critical in spelling out who's doing what in the partnership, but they need to be reviewed annually so that we can look at, well, what's working and what's not working. And sometimes I think, a report happens, or we lay out a plan, but we don't build that process in annually to really look at how is it working. We also really spent a lot of time, given the contributions of the members on the committee, we spent a lot of time really realizing that there's a difference between the accelerated options that students access through IB programs, International Baccalaureate programs, or advanced placement programs. Those are wonderful opportunities for students to access college credit, but it's done a very different way. First of all, the curriculum is established at a national level. There's training for the teachers that's provided. There's an exam that is developed at a national level. They're scored in a very specific way. I used to always think about, oh my goodness, if my writing has to be evaluated by somebody in Switzerland, how will I do? But the notion here is also the student does not earn the course credit until they've passed the exam and they've moved on to the institution of choice that then sits down and decides what they're going to accept. So it doesn't give the student that feeling right away, I have earned 3 credits, or I have earned 6 credits. So there's a difference there that we wanted to call out. All of that to say, and we've met with some folks to really look at what would be necessary to do this, we think that the existing AP and IB programs must maximize the course opportunities to make sure that as many students as possible are enrolled in those programs. We have 18 IB programs in the state, but there's empty seats in some of those classes. And so we think that there should be attention to that, and we should have one report that tells us where all of this lies annually, because I can tell you, having tried to provide the committee with data, it's everywhere, and it isn't all pulled together and analyzed in the same way. So let's move on and talk about a few more of these. Program development. Peyton and I were just talking earlier about how important it is for us to get a clean handle on where are these options not available in the state. That's a very challenging question to answer, and yet we need to map opportunities and non-opportunities to figure out where are students just not getting access because of where they live. And just today, Andrea Henderson was helping me understand a little bit more about, well, we have districts that don't pay taxes to support community colleges. And so there again, there's a gap where you might have some districts like Grant and Harney that are really not paying into a system, so they're not in a community college district. So that just, you can see the complication of this. We also feel that seed funding may be critical to at least get these partnerships in the places that don't have anything started, because you have to bring together people, you have to lay out what are the courses going to be, what makes the most sense for the community, and move forward. We may also need to do some seed funding that would look at development of statewide available online or hybrid courses. Because if a student can participate in a course where maybe the material is developed and presented in a flipped format by a community college or university program, they could then access that at their local community and not be hampered by the geographic distance that it may take for a faculty member to drive out or to have that coordination. We also just laid out some priorities for wherever new courses need to be developed, they must align with the Oregon Transfer Module. Otherwise, students are wasting their credits, they're wasting their time. We also feel a high priority has to be placed on courses that will transfer for career and technical education and that will lead to some post-secondary degrees or industry certifications that count, or towards licensure. We also wanted to call out the fact that the literature nationally is really pointing to the fact that we must develop some specific interventions for our high school juniors and seniors that are showing they're not quite there yet. We're going to have opportunities through either the use of the ACT or the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium to give feedback to 11th graders to say, wow, there's some areas that we can help you strengthen so that you will be college ready. And you may be able to do that through a transitional course that's available for you in your high school. In terms of enrollment, this is just a reminder that students have to be reminded to take courses that count. I could take underwater basket weaving, which for years as a young person I really didn't even think existed, but it is a real course. And it's interesting. I had friends that took that one. My parents didn't want me to. But the notion here is that let's really, let's advise them to take the courses that are going to help them the furthest in moving forward. With that also, we want to make sure that if a student is showing that they're not really college ready, this is the opportunity to offer a college success course. Do we need to wait until a student has matriculated to community college or 4-year to say, oh, and now I'm going to teach you how to be successful? This is a course where if we were to be able to develop a statewide vision of a course that has elements laid out, we could include how to complete the FAFSA, how to apply to colleges, how to determine my interests and match those up, how to develop the rigor that may be necessary for time management, the fiscal literacy that we talk about that college students need. We also think that the individual career and, it's an individual profile and career plan that is required for every student to graduate from high school is underutilized in this state. It's part of our high school diploma. This is the chance to bring this back out and to really dust it off and make it the maximum tool that says to students, this follows you during all of your years, maybe 7th grade on, and gives you a chance to track in what you're doing and your progress that you're making. With this comes a real focus on what we're calling a college-going culture. And this is not one person's responsibility. I think in the past, we sort of thought this was the guidance counselor's role. And we know that with the workloads that they have, they cannot do all of this. But there are ways that we can support through a college success course or through ongoing embedded opportunities in school where students actually begin developing and tracking and documenting their college success skills. I did a research paper. That counts as one of those readiness skills. When we get to the financial provisions, we spend a lot of time really trying to look at the lingering issues of uneven support, of charges that go from anywhere from $0 for a student to maybe $40 to $60 per credit, and realizing that there was an inequity in terms of the support that the community colleges needed in order to be a partner in this field. We also wanted to make sure that students were not going to be carrying the costs for the textbooks, for the fees, for the program. So we've kept it as a cost neutral for the student. And we are also we look deeply at this with colleagues from the Education Commission of the states around, is it really fair to fund students at 2 levels? And what we've determined is that the literature and policy analysts are pointing to the fact that this is an equitable model, but there's some things we can do to make it work better. In other words, for example, if students are earning the full average daily membership in the K-12 funding model and the post-secondary FTE equivalency in the college level for the university or community college, that some of that needs to be portioned over to cover the costs that are necessary to support the partnership around these courses. I think sometimes people think the course is just there, it becomes available, I take it, the student takes it, and that's it. What we know is that for it to meet academic rigor, it must involve engagement around high school instructors or community college instructors aligning the curriculum together around common course outcomes, developing the assessments that are necessary, and in some cases we've learned that the benefits of scoring those assessments together are truly what truly builds a partnership and collaboration. With this, we believe that that portion of the K-12 funding needs to go to the post-secondary partner to support things like faculty time to go to the high schools or to meet with the teachers and to engage in professional development. We also know that there's advising that if it's not blended between the K-12 and the post-secondary, we're missing the real opportunities that come about from supporting the student on both sides. So what we're recommending, this is loosely based off of an Ohio state policy that just went into play. We are keeping in touch with them as they move forward with implementation, where we're looking at a negotiated per credit rate that would have a floor and a ceiling and would also have a default rate. So if a district and their partner is not able to reach a negotiated per credit rate that supports the services that the post-secondary institution is going to provide, then there would be a default rate that would fall into place. And we've looked at several models that could be very equitable based on a percentage of what students might be able to earn if they were full-time enrolled, and basing that off of the ADM amount. So one of the things that's unique is that post-secondary institutions, they receive the funding based on completion of the course. In other words, I count that I had a student enrolled and my funding follows that. At the K-12 level, the proposal is that the base funding goes to the district because you have the student, but that we would put in a bonus payment for the completion rates. And this is important because it really gives an incentive to the K-12 partners to say, well, my seniors don't even come to the campus for a full load during their senior year. So what's going to get me to get them back on campus? Well, if there's an incentive to also say completion of college degree or college coursework can count towards that, that would be a strong incentive. What we also believe is that the districts can then opt to use some of that funding that they're receiving to buttress the other kinds of supports that are necessary. Teachers need time to do this work. They need to have the advising complementary to their work. Oh, let me go back. Governor Kitzhaber, you were with us during a very important discussion that we had with a number of districts that were implementing the fifth-year program. You probably recall that. And one of the issues that you charged it, or one of the tasks you charged us with, was to find more equitable funding formulas and to resolve this issue. Because right now we have students who are not, they may have met all of the requirements for graduation, but they're not being counted as graduates because the district is sort of holding on to the students to be able to provide those college courses on their campus or through their partner institutions. We think this model can address this, and it also disincents people to report them without reporting them accurately. So I know Rob Saxton is already working on some provisions that would clean up the data that we need to be able to accurately report the number of students who are graduating. A number of these I don't think you need to spend much time with because what we found is that good partners do this work anyway. They already work through what are the appropriate classrooms and furnishings. They figure out who's responsible for providing the instructional supplies. And of course, the colleges still need to approve the courses if they're giving college credit for them. But what we did find is that there are issues on number 6 here that we can improve. And Peyton referenced this, the fact that there needs to be some equitable outcomes for how faculty or instructors are approved. In other words, if I apply to one community college and another one, I should probably get back the same results on whether or not I'm approved as an instructor, and it needs to be done in a timely fashion to help the planning and scheduling of these courses. As Peyton mentioned, we think it's important to also think about what does the instructor bring to the table in addition to degree qualifications. What we might be talking about are teachers who are incredibly skilled at working with second language secondary students. They may have already been teaching an AP class and had 3 years of, scores of 6s for their students, 90% rate. Some of that can be part of what we call a statewide equivalency table that community colleges could help us look at and develop. We also think that there could be a need for seed funding to put together online content courses. I'm talking about the courses that teachers in high school could take during the summer months perhaps in the content areas that they're teaching. I know how difficult it is for them to find those classes all over the state. And if we had an online way to offer that, it could be developed and easily accessible. These last few items here under quality assurances, we found that many of these are already moving forward, but they must be a critical piece. The Eastern Promise model certainly gave us some strong pillars around this work, around professional development, PLCs, and we now have my last count was all but 18 counties in our state will be benefiting from the replication grants and added on to the Eastern Promise. So we think that we are moving forward in the right direction on that. But we also think there needs to be the development of a plan. This may not be this may start with the Oregon Department of Education to provide leadership around how we have a K-12 and post-secondary plan for college-going culture. It's a term that people bandy around a lot, but then if you go and look at individual places, you may find that there's very different rates of what that might mean in a student's life. We also think technology is incredibly important here. There are blended advising tools that we should be maximizing here that would help move this forward. And lastly, families and students need to be able to understand. And I'm just going to step out of my role for 1 second and say, you know, I have a PhD, and I can't tell you how difficult it was for me to dig through all of the different terminology and nuances of the existing options that we have in this state. And I thought to myself, if I was 18 or 17 or 16, and if I was a parent trying to explain it, I would have a hard time. So we've got to find a way to make this very transparent to people, to help them understand that, first of all, not every credit you take may actually transfer. That's a number one message that every post-secondary person has told us. Be sure to help people understand which courses transfer and why, and what kinds of guidance that we can give students as they work through that transfer. We also think we have incredible partners that are providing mentorships, after-school programs, the AVID programs, the Aspire programs, Gear Up and TRIO. We want all of those partners to be supportive and know everything about these options so that they're also communicating. And lastly, we think you and the governor and legislators deserve an annual report that gives you the specifics that we can't find right now, that leave our report card empty, because we don't have one way of actually pulling all of this information together, disaggregating it by student demographics, and then looking at by course type. So that concludes our draft recommendations, and we have a pad and pen so we can take back feedback.
Governor, I just want to appreciate the work that's been done here, and I remember we had a brief conversation when you asked me to join the OEIB, and this is what we were talking about. This is the kind of progress we want to make, and I look forward especially to that piece there with the transparency of adding to our, where is it, our report card, the kinds of pieces that make it available to the general public, and also the 15 and 16-year-olds. So I do want to laud the work. We still have work to do, but it sure is good to do.
So just to go back to the earlier conversation about having the scorecard, I think we value having the scorecard, even if we don't have it, that information, is it just, I think, continues to keep it present that we need to have that. So the expectation in the achievement compacts, and if we know that's an indicator for success, that putting it in the scorecard, even if it's with the asterisk that we have work to go, will keep us focused on that. One thing just in this in the presentation buried in here was sort of public school students having to pay for textbooks and other things related to taking college level courses. I guess I'm not sure who at the state was responsible for it, but the recent announcement about the AP and IB tests payment is super important for kids to be able to access that. So while it may not seem like a lot of money to many people, that's a barrier for a lot of students. It's enough, but it's
2.6 million.
But the individual is like $89 for.
It's $120,000 at my school, 80% of the kids taking one or more IB tests, and it's a huge move in the right direction to getting 100% of the kids to be able to take those IB tests.
So if we want to send a message that all kids should leave with their sort of 9 college credits, I mean, one of the things we may create a college going culture, but then there'll be a lot of barriers for all kids to access that. So they continue to be mindful of that, and I don't know how that translates into a legislative concept, but that seems important.
Well, I think you brought up a couple issues. One that we've addressed, we need a map. We need to have a map of Oregon and see where students are getting these opportunities and where they're not, to see where we need to target our efforts. But also schools self-report, and we're used to doing that. The U.S. News came out with best high schools in the country, and that's based on us telling them how many students take AP tests, how many take IB tests. We can easily say how many are earning dual credit in partnership with a higher ed institution. So we just need to require that schools and districts self-report without violating FERPA or any student confidentiality rights. It's harder sometimes to see how well they do by student. So in terms of the demographics and by subgroup. That's going to be a little harder, and we've wrestled with that. But we absolutely can now self-report our data about how many students are accessing those things. And there's no one right way. We talked a lot about there need to be multiple opportunities and pathways. So we're kind of thinking about what do we need to do here at high school, and that's AP classes and IB classes and dual credit opportunities, or AP and IB particularly. What do we need to do on our campus with higher ed, and that can be dual credit because you can have a teacher record and a professor. And then what does higher ed need to do, or can they do on their campuses, like the Running Start program in Washington, where the student leaves the high school campus and goes to that other campus for a different setting. And each of those three models, AP, IB, or dual credit, or off campus, will motivate and serve different kids and different learning styles with different needs. So we need to expand, literally expanded options, but expand our options to make sure we're having those platforms for different kinds of students with their different needs.
Obviously, exciting watching the Eastern Promise scale up, and when you think about the process that we went through as OEIB, from way back in the beginning, saying it's our job to look at outcomes and invest, and then to monitor and see how that's going. To me, how that process is really kind of a poster child of a lot of our initiatives, along with the hubs and the racks. But when I look at your presentation, all the work, and you're doing an amazing job of lifting this. The 5 pillars that we talked about are embedded within that. And I think we're going to see through this RFP process and the scale up, we're going to see people at the local level attacking the issues that are embedded in that. It's going to give us a lot of feedback. I think in a year from now, after all of the across the state of Oregon, because we know every region's different, how it perceives it, but they're all right now tackling those issues and trying to find ways around it. So I think we're going to see a lot of creative problem solving. We're going to be in a different place after we've had 5 regions in Oregon really trying to deal with these issues that are going to help us.
Cool.
So I think I have one maybe question or assumption to check, but I think I appreciate a lot of things about this. One piece that I think is coming out, the way I'm interpreting it, is that there's really going to be an emphasis on not just focusing on high-performing students, but really getting lots of different kids to participate. And I think all of the research really shows that if you actually take a student who is struggling and give them a college experience in a 1-credit class, it completely transforms their own expectations of themselves. So if that's what I'm interpreting that correctly, I think that's great. And I hope that we will be intentional in rolling this out in alternative schools as well, and other options around the state who many of those institutions have actually shown themselves to be the best at this kind of work. I have a suggestion and a question. So the suggestion is that throughout this work, I hope you'll really pay attention to gender equity and really ensuring that we're paying attention to boys and specific strategies to get boys enrolled and participating, and that strategy looks a little different. And then the last thing I would just ask is really about what work you plan on doing to really help support and shift the culture of principals, counselors, and teachers in identifying students, because that's actually one of the biggest barriers, is really the unconscious bias that exists in the perspective about which students are a good match for this. I can't tell you how many examples I've heard of districts around the state where the kids who are signed up are usually the teachers' children, or the really successful kids, or who is perceived as the really successful kids, or the kids who are perceived as being able to quote unquote take advantage of this opportunity. And I think that unconscious bias is more prevalent than we realize, and it's not going to change unless there's an intentional effort to address it. And that really needs to happen at the teacher level, but also on the school leadership level as well. So I'm just curious about that strategy.
Something that I think all people should be curious about. And it's interesting, if you've read the book Why Boys Fail, they really put a lot of emphasis on the problems with an overemphasis on early literacy, particularly for boys. And we're talking about 3rd grade reading strategies, but also the lack of male teachers and not enough nonfiction that captures their interests when they're little. So Common Core should help with a little of that maybe. But technical ed was another piece that some presenters said. I don't see enough technical ed and dual credit that might engage hands-on learners, which sometimes are boys, but also for girls to close that gap with women in technology. So it's come up a couple of times, but mostly through, we need to see more CTE and technical ed in this plan. And then I think we really need to be talking from kindergarten on about boys and achievement, and hopefully not creating any issues earlier on that then continue to affect high school. I did want to say that some of this work is really inspiring too, when you talk about the partnerships between high school teachers and professors at higher ed, and talking about overall teacher effectiveness and preparing our teachers, that aligning professional development K-12 and with higher ed around proficiency or Common Core or courageous conversations around race, that will be really powerful when we take our teachers and our professors and align and articulate that work, and also that collaboration. We're doing professional learning communities now horizontally, but really what could happen when you look at that vertically as well as horizontally, it'd be really powerful. So there's some opportunities with this work that also intersect with other pieces of work around teacher effectiveness.
And I would simply add that the college-going culture, that to me is exactly what you were talking about, that you just wrap this around all students and that you create different ways that students can experience that, including mentors of other students who may have graduated from the high school, bringing them back. I mean, there's so many different ways that it isn't just one adult saying to a student, you should try college. We just need to wrap all of that around the students, and I think that will help also negate and change that belief system that you were talking about. Excuse me.
There probably need to be some pilot programs or incentives. One of the studies that we read looked at the early college model, and they looked at 10 schools across the country, and 7 were co-located on community college campuses, 7 of the high schools, and 3 were co-located on university campuses. So in terms of helping students feel, reducing the barriers and connecting kids, when they on a college campus and they're earning credits, they were 50% more likely to earn up to 10 college credits before they graduate from high school. So as we think about our growing state and as we expand our higher ed, it would be really important to look at how can K-12 be co-located in some way with higher ed to reduce the barriers and streamline that process for kids, because some kids just aren't going to get on a bus and go even 2 miles to access college credit. They're going to say, where are my friends? Where do I feel comfortable? Does it feel like family? More than they're going to independently, just individually go off to get that. Some will, but not all, and particularly when you look at students who are struggling, we need to somehow connect them.
So I think the governor called on me next before he left, so I'm going to speak and then I'm going to recognize David. Thank you for this work. I think you've really shown us what all the challenges are with this and come up with a really good set of recommendations. There is one that I need to address, which Hilda, I'm sure you won't be surprised, and that is the qualifications of approval of high school instructors. And I think there are some challenges with that. I think accreditation is a piece of it, but I think also the very strong faculty culture in higher education that gives them authority over curriculum and, to a great extent, authority over assessing the credentials of their colleagues, some of which is embedded in collective bargaining agreements in community colleges across the state. So I think this is a massive cultural change when you introduce the word standardization. And this isn't just a technical problem that needs a technical fix or a piece of legislation. It's an adaptive cultural problem or challenge. I mean, the faculty wouldn't call it a problem. They would say this is the way it should be. And I have a lot of reason to support that position actually in higher education. So I think we just need to go in with our eyes wide open and think very, very carefully about this. I do recognize the challenge from the K-12 perspective, What I would say is that I think we all embrace the goal of having, the outcome of having every high school student have access to 9 credits. And I think creatively, we can work together with COSA and others to figure out how we do this without kind of having full-on resistance to challenging faculty authority in these arenas.
So last week at our Accelerated Learning Committee meeting, which we just reviewed these recommendations, we also had a testimony from Andrea Henderson and also from Gerald Hamilton. And my understanding is there is a collaborative work group that's been formed, and I'm excited that some of us will be able to join that conversation. And I have been having conversations with other folks around the nation, actually, around accreditation and the perception of what stops, what moves forward. And I just think that, opening that up a little bit to talk about we're operating like a seamless system. Maybe accreditors now need to operate like a seamless system, and maybe they haven't yet really thought about that in ways of what might be able to support that and not lower standards, but support a culture that truly operates like a seamless system where it should. Thank you.
So David.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate what others have said. It's a great report. I think it's the OAIB's goals of having every student do 3 college courses or more is great, and I think this very comprehensive report lists a lot of ways we can get there. I think there's an added plus that it will help decrease the necessity for developmental ed courses when students get to college. I like the fact that the report addresses the cost to the student and the funding to the institutions. I think we have to see both. Sometimes one or the other of that side of the discussion is lost when we're talking about higher education, tuition, and funding. So I think that's important. That's addressed there. There's a lot in there with the quality assurance part about faculty collaboration between the high school and college institutions, and that's going to be real critical. I think that should be expanded upon more, in fact. It's going to be quite critical, and it's going to need some funding and support, because what I'm hearing from teachers involved in various initiatives around the state that are working on dual credit and other kinds of college and high school initiatives are, a lot of it's being added to their workload. It's an extra. It's like, adding extra 5-10 hours a week on or whatever, and it's not being recognized as part of the workload. And people can do that. Sure, it's a new initiative they want to support and everything, but if we want to make it sustainable, it's going to be necessary. And I think that should get addressed too. It's good. It mentions that the curriculum remains the responsibility of the colleges. Certainly, if we're going to have students experience academic rigor and a true college education, that's going to be necessary, that the colleges retain responsibility for the curriculum. However, and it's to say also what Mary has said, I'm hearing it from a lot of faculty throughout the state, statewide standardization of instructor qualifications. A lot of faculty are really concerned about this. Now, the report doesn't really go into the reasons for this. It's there in about 2 or 3 different parts of the report as a recommendation, but it makes no reference to what existing qualifications there are at the colleges, nor, I should say, the considerable flexibility out there. You did mention, you kind of explained it when you talked about proficiency, because that was not clear in her either, why proficiency should also be a determinant factor in addition to or even over qualifications. And then you said, well, there's exemplary teaching and experience, and I think there is a lot of that going on already in colleges. You'll find with a lot of career technical courses, in fact, there's a lot of industry and other experience taken into account, and a lot of college faculty in those departments and divisions do allow instructors in that meet other standards. And I think you even find that even in the sciences and liberal arts, for example. There's a lot of that going on. There's no mention in this report of that and the fact it does happen. And there's really no mention about what the existing standards are, which for the most part are a master's with, usually with a minimum amount of accreditation in that particular discipline. So I think without that discussion, this report really, I mean, it's causing even more consternation among faculty throughout the state about why does some outside board or legislator or legislature want to come in and start dictating what those standards are, when that has been the tradition in higher education with faculty governance and faculty governance of curriculum and instructor qualifications. Mary mentions it's in contracts. Well, not only that, it's a lot of accreditation agencies even recognize that that is the faculty's role in determining who is eligible and qualified to teach those courses. And I can give you lots of other reasons why faculty consider the existing qualifications they have so necessary. And I think that's probably a discussion we should have with between post-secondary and their K through 12 colleagues, and that's not really in here. And I think that discussion does have to take place because I think faculty have a lot of valid points about the level of expertise and the depth of knowledge and the context for their discipline that come from having those standards. So I'll just say, you know, it should be nothing new to the committee. They've heard this all through too. But to see this in the report with no context and no reasoning and without really further discussion, it's going to be a major hindrance. I think there's going to be a lot of faculty concern will continue, to put it mildly.
And David, you are reminding me that there was a document that was part of the committee's discussion that outlined all of the laws, the standards, the dual enrollment standards, and state policies from all over the United States. So I just didn't have that in here, so I really appreciate the reminder that without that, there's this void, and we will certainly make a better attempt at that.
We definitely heard a lot about that, and the only thing that I want just everyone to think about is, you know, we already have IB programs, for example. Just take that as an example, where teachers are selected by the high school principal to become IB trained and teach IB courses, and then the students take tests and they routinely graduate with 30 to 42 college credits. And U of O has said, we love to get your IB students with their 30 to 42 college credits that were awarded really through a test, but taught by a teacher who does not have most times a master's or a PhD in their subject area. So, you know, the authority of curriculum is an interesting question, because even within IB...
But that test is corrected by college level instructors, I must point out. The test, the coursework and the test in particular, is corrected by college level instructors. It's not corrected by, not set up and instructed by those instructors.
So I'm going to go ahead and call on Hannah.
Sorry.
The counterpoint that I'm sure we'll all take under consideration. I'm going to call on Hannah and then maybe one more, and then we're going to take breaks.
One of the exciting things about the work we were doing was going P through 20 and really bringing everyone together and all of us owning education across the state. So I think it's exciting, and we're talking about higher ed and how we're going to have this conversation and articulate between K-12 and community college with dual credit. But I will just echo, and I won't repeat everything David said, but there are great concerns, both from K-12 and higher ed, about dual credit and how we do it. So I think on the right track, some really great work, but we've got to make sure that we engage in those conversations before we roll it out and it not be successful. The question I have, you talked about, I think you said 18 counties, is that? So half of the counties have dual credit, 36, is that right?
I just remember counting on the map, and there were 18 counties that are not part of an Eastern Promise program or replication.
And one of the things I think for us to keep in mind and keep working towards is, if we're talking about all students, how do we make sure they have access? Because the rural districts, as I've talked with superintendents and educators, are really struggling to be able to offer this. So Orbit is an opportunity. We've got that out there. We've created it. we believe it's an important component, so thank you.
So Nicole and then Kay, and then we'll wrap up.
So, I don't know, I'll just make a comment, which is, it just seems like we spend so much time on this board imposing a lot of standards and expectations around teachers and our K-12 system, and yet there seems to be a big resistance to having that conversation on the higher ed front. And I know it's a really difficult conversation, but I just think it's a little bit unfair, and it makes us seem like we are having different types of conversations at different parts of the system. And so I just would reflect on that a little bit. And I would also say that in my experience working quite heavily with community colleges and districts, it is not uncommon to have teachers who actually have the exact same qualifications as community college teachers. And so I'm not sure if there's a deeper issue that we're not talking about that's about job security or protection or turf. But I just think at some point we need to maybe delve a little bit deeper in that, particularly when, while we know our teachers are not as diverse as our students, our community college teachers are even less diverse than our teachers. And so I just think we maybe need to think a little bit differently about how to have this conversation in a more constructive way that may not be as polarizing or set up different expectations about how we transform different parts of the system.
I would only add this comment, if this really is going to be an opportunity for all students, that you might want to include some language in your report that defines some guidelines in terms of how the students are selected, and not leave it to be the arbitrary decisions of teachers.
Mary? Yeah. I feel that K-12 has been bullied around and told you have to do things for years because the money's attached to it more so. And the faculty at our community colleges do have some professional discretion that we don't, and we need to have it, and that's what I believe that we talked about when we talked about the rules. So I hope we can quit putting so much pressure on K-12 and telling them what to do and actually listen to them, because I think we'll be stronger when we do it.
Well, I would just say that, I think that, I do think the cultures are different, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, cultures are different. And I don't think anybody's opposed to having a discussion, but I think having faculty engagement is clearly important in K-12, and I would say double that up for higher ed because of the difference in culture. If we don't get faculty engagement in these conversations, it's going to be very difficult to get any change. So I welcome the conversation both here and elsewhere. I'm going to say let's take a 10-minute break. So we're going to move on with subcommittee reports, and because of people's schedules, we're going to switch that up just a little bit, and we're going to start with personnel management oversight. Julia.
Thank you, and I'm going to apologize in advance. I have to leave this report. So the Personnel Management Oversight Committee is composed of myself, Kay Turan, and Dick McNell. We meet quarterly and as a committee or meeting or conference call, and then I have a monthly call meeting with the chief of staff, Whitney Grubbs. And our three focus areas since we were formed mid-year was working with the chief education officer on the work plan and scorecard. And is the scorecard being handed out? Or is that, did we agree with you, we're going to send it out after the meeting? The scorecard and the work plan, not the...
Oh, yes, that's right.
Okay, so there is a work plan that we have with a scorecard for chief education officer. It's aligned with OEID priorities and the strategic plan. We'll be sending that out afterwards, just so you all have visibility into sort of how the subcommittee is engaging with the chief education officer. We've also spent a fair amount of time on developing the protocols and policies for out-of-state travel and non-OEID external work with board service. And sort of an administrative portion of our committee work is sort of ongoing oversight of expenses, travel and staff, and then the trainings and compliance functions for the chief education officer and the staff. And then the third piece, which is really will be the subject of the main content of my report today, is the preparation for the 2013-14 evaluation process. We had a meeting 2 weeks ago, or a conference call, where we walked through what the sort of evaluation process would be for this year. Obviously, Dr. Golden was hired. When did we bring you on for that? September, so it hasn't been a full year. August 1st. So
October 1st.
it won't quite be a full year, but we figure it's good this first year to just sort of get in a regular cycle of an evaluation. So what has been handed out is a proposed sort of process by which we would undertake the evaluation. So the first step is there's a proposed process and a feedback form, and what we want to do is share that today and then provide a couple weeks for members of the board to provide feedback to our subcommittee on the form, the process, so that we can integrate that into what would be the formal evaluation process. So you should take all of these, they don't say draft on them, but all of these are, it's a draft process, timeline, and template. And as you'll see, so May 31st, we would have completed the template, the process, and agree upon it, and then move into sort of the active evaluation process with really two phases, one being a self-evaluation, and then the second being board and key agency and leader staff input, and then the committee would basically review that, prepare findings, and then bring the findings to the board at our August 12th meeting. So that's just in summary what we're proposing. Kay or Dick, do you have anything you want to add or amplify?
Good.
So happy to take questions or comments now, or you also can send them to me or to Whitney, and we can consider them as a committee and integrate them with the.
Any questions for Julian?
Not a question, but should we move on this, or should we, as a larger group, because I know we're gonna do some revisions possibly, but I think it's important to keep with some of the timelines just because of the way they run, and I think it'd be important to show support for this as the process at this point. So I'm asking what, Madam Chair, what's appropriate here to let Julia and our colleagues know that we support this part here and that we are with the process that they've created.
So, may I respond? So I appreciate the willingness to indicate support. I think maybe the better time when people have had a chance to review it, and let's we have an opportunity to see if there's any significant revisions, maybe hold off on that until we have a check-in in June. And I think certainly we also can communicate by email with the full board if there is a significant revision that's suggested and that the committee recommends the board.
But it is our intent at the June meeting to formally accept the report and adopt the process.
We'll just make sure.
That's what
We'll make sure that that's on the agenda, and I'm looking at what they.
Yes, that's right. So it's that you have some time to provide feedback to Julia by email, and you'll make revisions and send them out. You'll get them before the June board meeting, and then at the June board meeting, you can formally adopt the process and template, and then we'll go ahead and roll it out.
Thank you.
So might I be able to provide feedback and those on that one? Is that something that I can do?
That's the type of feedback we're looking for.
just on the evaluation, when we started talking about evaluating, we started talking about evaluating the chief education officer and also the work that we're doing. So at our retreat that we're doing, are we going to talk about what we've done and what we can do? Is that part of your charge, or is that something?
So it's interesting because this is an issue that Dick brings up almost every time we meet. And the decision on our last call was that was probably a more appropriate activity for the full board to participate in versus the personnel management oversight, because really our scope is the relationship between the board and the chief education officer. But you're not the first to ask, so I guess I would say that we think there's a need, but maybe a committee or the full.
I would be comfortable if at our retreat we had a real engaged conversation about what we're doing and how if we're meeting benchmarks that we set for ourselves and what, I think it would be good for us to have that conversation.
Thanks. Okay, thank you, Julia. We'll move on to Dick with the outcomes and investments.
Yes, thank you for letting me get going here. I apologize for being late today. Morrison Family and Children's had their first public ask for funds today, and I was up there representing you guys, did you knew it or not. I behaved myself, so it all went great. So, and then I got the same thing here at 4:15, so another ask. We have a free clinic here in town that handles 800 patients a week at no cost to the physicians and also drugs. So it's a rock and roll deal here in Marion County. Seth is handing out now materials for us, and while he's doing that, our committee is made up of Henrietta Vanderleen, Ron Saxon, Pam Curtis, and Duncan Wise, and we met just the last week of April. The Outcomes and Investments Subcommittee has developed a process for hearing from other boards, commissions, and subcommittees, and you'll see that on the calendar that's outlined there in front of you. Last month we worked with OEIB staff and to create the template that is also in your packet. Over the summer, each group will present their top budget strategies and answer the questions that are in the template there in front of you. One of the critical things that we'll be looking at is which strategies can we really move the dial on. If there's any low-hanging fruit, that needs your input as a full board course that will reflect the outcomes on the scoreboard. And at the end of the summer, our Outcomes and Investment Subcommittee will examine all the different recommendations and prioritize them, and then using the equity lens and other evidences of return on investment. And then we'll bring that to the full board, our initial set of recommendations on August 12th at the retreat that we just talked about, and that will get more input, more feedback from you, and then our subcommittee will then do some work to incorporate the feedback into the final recommendations. The final recommendations for the governor's budget will be presented by September 9th OEIB meeting. Time is clicking away, and so we'll be pretty active here. So that's any questions or anything?
Questions for Dick?
That's quite a name for the subcommittee, is Outcomes and Investments. Some people have the silly idea that we are responsible for outcomes and investments. There's a rumor going around, I refer them to the CEO, Nancy.
Oh, I thought that meant the Whitnall was gonna write us a check.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Dick.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Best practices and student transitions, Dr. Curtis.
Okay. So today at our meeting, we heard a report from Powering Up Oregon, Transforming Learning in Oregon Schools about using technology to transform learning. That started with a group from COSA. They provided for us a list of barriers and some recommended solutions, which we will include and first prioritize and include in our recommendations that we'll bring to you on June 10th. Then we also heard from school leadership in Oregon, initial findings and recommendations from the Chalkboard Distinguished Leaders Council. We've asked them to come back in September after they have more work to do and they want to join their work with some work other partners doing the same kind of work are doing across the state around leadership development. So we'll hear from them again in September. We are prioritizing all our recommendations as we said we would in our plan that we gave to OEIB. We said we would come forward with some recommendations around policies and tasks that we would ask OEIB to support in us recommending to different agencies and organizations. Along with that, we will prioritize some key funding investments that we will discuss with the Outcomes and Investment Committee in July. And then I guess we move forward with them after that. And that's it for today.
Any questions? Thanks.
Nicole.
So we are in a process of recalibrating. We have had some staffing transitions, and I think that it's made us really look at our work, and we actually need to sort of adjust our work for this year. But we are very pleased that Peter will be joining us as our lead staff person, and very pleased with his experience on sort of all different areas of education, including K-12 and higher ed. And so I think we feel we have a handle on how to rethink our work for the remainder of the year. We're also looking very closely and in the process of finalizing a schedule to work collaboratively with the Outcomes and Investment Committee so that we can really fully realize the equity lens in that process. And then the last piece that I would share is that we're right now really exploring how we can think about where we're ready and where we might be able to make some meaningful requests for investments.
Any questions? Okay, now we're going to move to agency reports, and this month it's our Youth Development Council Irisville Director.
Staff is going to pass out to you a quick update that I'm going to give to Jill. It's not
okay, thanks.
But it is.
I'll be sure.
No, but what it is, when last I was actually presenting, I think it was even prior to the legislative session, but since then, the Youth Development Council and the division actually went through the session, and we made a standing after the session. And with the leadership of our chair, Matt Morton, and our vice chair, Jay Dixon, and the council itself, we have begun our process for actually trying to make some investments in the community. And so the first part of that was information and training. You'll see that in the information that Seth is passing out, where you'll see that we held trainings around the state this last April into May. Two of which were around, several of which were, two of which were actually webinars, and then the rest were on our our crime prevention, our youth innovation, and our youth and community grants themselves. Thank you so much, Mark, for hosting us in your part of the world. It's always great to be able to reach out and get partners to help us with our training sessions. And so we were able to go around the state and do the training piece. On the next page, you'll see actually our timelines for how we are actually going to be able to get the funds into communities in September. The process right now, we released our RFAs, requests for applications, last Thursday. And so they are out in the community. They went far and wide. They are out in the community right now. They will actually come back in. The deadline is June 16th, with about 6 weeks of folks in the community. Again, that timeline reflects the need for the collective impact component of what we're working on and what we're requiring to take place with the grants actually in communities by September. We're going to be making some investments there. We're going to be going to the Outcome and Investments Subcommittee and kind of presenting what that investment package actually looks like. You have here a quick overview of each of the investments in this particular document, but a little more extensive presentation will be for that particular subcommittee with the idea that we will be making awards and negotiating outcomes with those awardees that will align with the Oregon Education Investment Board as well as with the Department of Education. So that is the intent, and our folks in the field know that as they apply, they are being asked to take a look at indicators of need and equity, which is embedded in the application process itself. I say that because many times, as I've been talking about the equity wins, it's setting separate. Ours is embedded in. So as you go through the application process, there is the assurance that you are looking at equity as you move through that particular process. So we're really excited and anxious to see what the responses are going to do, like what we get back, and how then we negotiate the alignment with the board as well as with the department. Yeah, so that's where we are.
Thank you. Any comments or questions?
Just on timelines for reporting, Iris, what are you seeing in terms of this looping back to us? I know it takes a while to get the funds out and all the other pieces.
We'll do a quick something sort of interim with the outcomes and investments, just so they.
We're sorry, your conference is ending now. Please hang up.
Just so they know where we are, and then sometime probably in September, once those awards are made and we've negotiated the outcomes with the awardees, we would probably come back and be able to give a presentation to you on how we align those, because they're going to have to align with the work of with the expectations and outcomes that the board is speaking, as well as with the strategic plan and investments that the department will get into. So that's where we'll be really wanting to come back in the fall and sort of show you where we are.
Thank you.
What is the total amount of money you're granting out?
Okay, so it's in different grant streams. In the first grant stream, which is our youth and community grant, we have 6.4 million, but that's a biennial. So what we'll have is about 3 million out. And then in our youth and innovations grant, there's 1.6 million. And then we have smaller amounts in our youth and gangs and our youth and crime. But in our youth and gangs, it's about $750,000. And then in our youth and crime, which is our federal funds, which have dwindled over time just incredibly. In fact, our juvenile accountability block grant, this is the last year the federal government is going to issue that particular grant. So federal monies are really drying up. And so with those particular grants, we have like 104,000, and then another one we have about 120,000. That's about it for the federal.
So the federal monies are going away in
Yeah,
terms
well,
of.
much of it is. Yes, still have formula grant money. I know this is kind of, we'll still have some formula grant money coming from the federal government, but all of the juvenile accountability block grant, Congress actually wiped out that category nationwide, so there will.
And that's all the JPAC and JJAC
That's right.
that we used to have.
That's right. That'll be gone. This is the last year.
Any other questions? Thank you, Iris. Appreciate it. We're going to move to public testimony now. Let me just read the statement. This is the portion of our agenda where we take public comment. I want to remind those members of the public who have indicated a desire to make comments that our policy provides for a limitation of 3 minutes per person. The board will not hear personal complaints concerning personnel at a particular agency or institution, and nor will the board respond to any public comments, but will direct the chief education officer or other agency leaders to respond at their discretion. Speakers are reminded that their public comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and Seth will keep time. We have 3 people today, and first is Steve Buell, Oregon Save Our Schools.
My name is Steve Buell, and I'm wearing the Oregon Save Our Schools hat today. That's the one that bothers everybody. I'd like to bring this kind of down to the real world, what's happening in schools. Have you ever, any of you ever looked at the sample questions for the SBAC testing? It kind of reminds me a little bit of when you go out to Fred Meyer and they have the cheese and little samples of cheese, and you stick in the toothpick and you eat the cheese, and if the cheese tastes good, you might buy it. If the cheese doesn't taste good, then you're not going to buy it. And so I thought, well, I'll take a look at the SBAC tests, questions that they had, the samples, and see if they're any good. And they were atrocious. It's unbelievable how bad they are. And I keep talking to person after person who's looked at them, and they talk about how atrocious they are. Now, these are the best sample questions that they have. Or you think they're putting out the worst ones? These are terrible. I looked at the 6th grade, and I taught 6th grade for 14 years, self-contained, and a lot of other 6th grade. And all 5 of the major sample questions had pretty large errors in them. Errors. I was talking to a 3rd grade teacher from Milwaukee. They have doing this back in Washington too. She said one of the 3rd grade questions they put out into her staff, and there were 4 answers, and the staff split a third on 3 of the answers. The staff on the 3rd grade test. And so I just think that maybe we should be taking a look at that. And maybe if the samples aren't good, maybe we shouldn't be buying the test, because we don't get to check out the test, right? No one in Oregon has ever seen the test that we're now going to use. And you're advising the governor, I assume, to take this test. So here's your advice that I can see. This is your advice to the governor. Spend millions of dollars on a test which will heavily influence the education of every child in Oregon, which no one in Oregon has ever seen, based upon examples which are terrible. And while we were at it, let's use this test, which no one in Oregon has ever seen, to label schools and impact communities, evaluate and label teachers, even though any decent researcher can tell you this type of testing is inaccurate and thus unfair. And lastly, we are using it to label children, creating in many of them a false sense of what education is and should be, as well as doing a good job of psychological damage. Now, you might think that your deputy superintendent would step in here and give you some educational words of wisdom. But he's quoted this week in the newspaper that he isn't aware of kids crying over the testing. I don't know if that's the case, but heck, he might spend any time out talking to teachers. All sorts of teachers know and have seen kids crying over the testing. I've seen teachers crying over the testing. It's really terrible. In fact, my great nieces, I've had 2 of them. One is an 8th grader and straight A student all the way through middle school, and she failed the test. It wasn't the SBAC, but and she's crying over it. So I've seen them crying, and also another niece who's now on medications for the anxiety from the testing. So
Could you wrap up with 3 minutes?
I think that I'd just like to compliment you on way to go. Great advice you're giving the governor. You have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Next is Eva Payne. State your name for the record, your affiliation.
Pardon?
Your name for the record and...
Oh, yeah, Payne, Eva Payne.
Thank you.
And I'm a little nervous. This is my first time doing anything like this. I'm Eva Payne, and thank you for the opportunity to talk about the lack of statewide oversight and uniformity in Oregon's new mandate to offer dual credit opportunities, especially the awarding of proficiency-based credit. I teach writing and literature at Chemeketa. I have served as program chair. I'm the incoming national chair of the National Council of Teachers of English 2-Year College Association. But I'm here today as a representative from OEAC, the Oregon Writing English Advisory Council group. And OEAC shared concerns in an email to the Accelerated Learning Committee in December of 2013. And then again in February 28th, I shared with the OEAC meeting the model that we're using at Chemeketa to award proficiency-based credit. And we talked about the problems with that particular model. One of the main focuses of our February discussion was, and this is between, OEAC represents all 17 community colleges and 7 senior colleges. We have representatives from all the groups, and sadly, since the state quit paying for substitute teachers to come from K-12, we don't have as much K-12 representation as we should have, especially with the collaboration that needs to be done. But our concerns mainly focused on how this is going to impact students. If students are erroneously awarded credit because of inadequate or incorrect assessment, they may struggle being underprepared and frustrated because they'll have only the certification of skills without the actual skills. The other bigger problem, perhaps, is the validity of proficiency assessment tools used. If the validity of the tools used to assess proficiency credit is invalid, the transfer value of those credits are likely to decline, thus impacting such things as the organ transfer module and the AAOT. Chemeketa is not alone in pursuing opportunities for offering proficiency-based credit. Seeing what other models in other disciplines and at other colleges are doing would provide a path forward, because our institutions and programs of study don't operate in isolation. The statewide work done for OTM and AAOT was time-consuming, messy, sometimes contentious, but it served the purpose of making students' credits transferable among all OUS institutions, and that was really good for students. This worked particularly well for writing, because at that same time, OEAC got together and developed 4-credit writing course outcomes based on the WPA writing program administers outcomes that are national outcomes that we all use on all campuses. I've only seen Chemeketa's model in partnership with the Willamette Educational Service District, and we call our pilot project the Yamhill model. The pilot's still in process, but it's a flawed process with many unanswered questions about rigor, assessment, authority, and certainly whether the high school students who may be awarded 115 or 121 credit during this pilot will actually be prepared for college-level writing. Please consider establishing an oversight committee that could ensure quality, uniformity, and good stewardship of the funding provided by Oregon Strategic Investments and students and educators to implement proficiency-based teaching and learning models. The need is urgent because, as you know, consortiums are established, money is distributed, and work is underway with no communication. Okay. In addition, specific guidelines should be established with the help of the disciplinary experts, teacher preparation, course content, and assessment. OEAC could provide that for writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva, and thanks for providing this in writing. Appreciate it. Finally, we have Kevin Fury.
My name is Dr. Kevin Fury, and I'm an economics instructor at Chemeketa Community College, and I'm also the Community College advisor to the State Board of Education. And I'm here also to talk about performance-based dual credit. In our discussions at the State Board having to do with the revisal of the OARs, as well as our discussion around dual credit, Rob Saxton has been adamant about the fact that if these high school courses don't have college rigor to them, if they're not college level courses, then we shouldn't be offering college credit for them. Now, what we've seen at Chemeketa, at least in the implementation of the Eastern Promise grant, is that this isn't coming out that way. And I think the major reason for this is that the incentives and fears that those who are implementing it, the school superintendents, are different from those who are at the top of the educational superstructure. In particular, those who are implementing this have, as part of their achievement compacts, they have the number of college credits that their students have achieved before they graduate. Also, there's a fear out there that there'll be legislation coming very soon that will require all high school graduates to have 9 credits of college work. And while I'm sure there's no superintendent out there who wants their students to have a lower quality education, and I'm sure there's no superintendent out there who wants to set up their students for failure in the next level, if you have a situation where you have rewards given for quantity and there are no rewards for quality, then you're setting up a system which is biased towards sacrificing quality for the sake of quantity. Now, what we've seen at Chemeketa, and Eva, of course, talked in much more detail about this, But what we've seen at Chemeketa is instead of the college instructors determining what is going to be the content of the course, what will be the assessments of the course, what will be the grading structure of the course, what we've seen is negotiations at every step of the process. And at every turn, those who are representing the high schools are asking for less work and lower standards. One way around the problem with quality here, and the way around from negotiations district by district by district, is to establish statewide standards. OEAC is already set up as an organization which would pull together 4-year schools and 2-year schools and could collaborate with high schools. I imagine that that the math professions could do the same. There's a statewide community college math group, and I imagine there's probably one at the 4-year schools. Having statewide standards set up by English and math will serve as a good example for the other disciplines as attempts are made to expand them. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Fury. Appreciate it. That concludes our public comment. Is there anything else we need in the order? If not, we're adjourned.